You know what they call a wolf who survives her own death? Dangerous. When King Varric Duskbane stood before the entire imperial court and tore the sacred bond from his fated mate's chest, he thought he was eliminating weakness. What he actually did was create the one thing no empire can survive: a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. This is the story of Seraphine Vale, the rejected queen who learned that revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about becoming so powerful they destroy themselves trying to stop you. Stick with me until the end of this saga, hit that like button, and drop your city in the comments so I know where my pack is watching from. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. The rain fell like bullets on the obsidian courtyard of the Thornfell Palace, each drop exploding against black stone with a violence that matched the shredding inside Seraphine's chest. She stood alone in the center of the imperial amphitheater, her silver ceremonial gown plastered to her skin. The delicate beading meant to symbolize unity now hanging in broken strands like shattered promises. Blood bloomed across the fabric just above her heart. Not from any physical wound, this was worse. This was the sacred bond tearing itself apart from the inside out, the mystical tether between fated mates being severed by sheer force of rejection. It felt like her soul was being scraped out with a rusty blade while her body remained standing, too stubborn or too stupid to collapse. The entire court watched from beneath the gilded archways, dry and safe and utterly silent. 300 nobles, generals, foreign dignitaries, and minor royals who had traveled from every corner of the empire to witness what should have been a historic bonding ceremony. Instead, they got a public execution. Varric stood 20 feet away beneath the imperial canopy, still wearing his ceremonial armor, the black and gold plate etched with the crest of the Duskbane bloodline. He looked like a god carved from midnight and wrath, 7 feet of alpha dominance wrapped in power so absolute it bent the air around him. His eyes, usually the color of molten amber, had gone flat and cold as river stones. He hadn't even shifted. That's what made it worse. He'd rejected her in human form, with human words, without giving her the dignity of wolf-to-wolf combat, where at least instinct might have softened the blade. This was calculated, premeditated. A political assassination dressed up as royal decree. "Your wolf is too weak," he'd said, his voice carrying across the courtyard with the resonance of absolute authority. "Your bloodline offers nothing to the imperial succession. You possess no territory, no strategic alliances, no political value whatsoever. The empire requires strength, and you, Seraphine Vale, are a liability I will not tolerate beside my throne." The words kept repeating in her head like a curse she couldn't shake. Too weak. No value. Liability. She'd known going into this that their bond was complicated. Fated mates weren't always compatible mates. The mystical pull that slammed wolves together didn't give a damn about personalities or ambitions, or whether two people could actually stand each other outside of the supernatural magnetism. But she'd thought, gods, she'd been stupid enough to think, that maybe the bond meant something. That destiny wouldn't be cruel enough to tie her soul to a man who saw her as nothing more than a mistake to be corrected. The rain kept falling. Her knees wanted to buckle, but she locked them straight, refused to give Varric or his court the satisfaction of watching her crumble. If she was going to die out here from bond shock, and she probably was, then she'd die on her feet. One of the court physicians, an elderly wolf named Corwin, who'd served the Duskbane family for 40 years, stepped forward from the covered walkway. He moved carefully, like approaching a wounded animal, his weathered face creased with something that might have been pity. "Your Majesty," he said, addressing Varric. "Not her. The bond severance will kill her within the hour. Perhaps we should move her to the infirmary, where—" "No!" Varric's voice cut through the rain like a blade through silk. "She remains where she stands. Let the court see what happens when weakness attempts to claim what it has not earned." Corwin froze mid-step, then slowly backed away. No one else moved. No one spoke. The message was clear. Seraphine was already dead. They were just waiting for her body to figure it out. She focused on breathing. In through her nose, out through her mouth, each breath a small act of defiance against the darkness creeping in from the edges of her vision. Her wolf, the part of her soul that should have been howling in rage or grief, had gone completely silent. That was almost worse than the pain. The emptiness where her other half should have been felt like standing at the edge of an abyss with nothing but void below. Someone laughed, One of the younger nobles, probably emboldened by wine and the Alpha King's obvious contempt. The sound triggered a ripple of nervous chuckles from the crowd, that particular brand of cruelty that only happens when people sense there will be no consequences for kicking someone who's already down. Seraphine turned her head slowly toward the sound, found the face. A third son of some minor house, barely 20, with the kind of soft features that said he'd never actually had to fight for anything in his life. She locked eyes with him and smiled. Not a kind smile. A smile that promised if she somehow survived this, she'd remember exactly who laughed. The kid's face went pale and he looked away fast, suddenly fascinated by his boots. Movement at the edge of the courtyard caught her attention. A figure stepping out from beneath the archway, moving with the kind of fluid grace that marked an alpha used to owning whatever space he occupied. At first she thought it was one of Varric's commanders coming to drag her corpse away early. But then the scent hit her. Pine and smoke and winter storms. Not Thornfell pack. Not any pack sworn to the Empire. The man crossed the courtyard through the rain like it didn't exist, his long black coat billowing behind him, dark hair plastered to a face that looked carved from the same stone as the mountains north of the Empire. He moved past Varric without so much as a glance, walked straight up to Seraphine and draped his coat over her shoulders. The fabric was still warm. The scent was overwhelming. Alpha, powerful, dangerous. "You're going to want to keep breathing," he said quietly, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "Because in about 30 seconds, this whole courtyard is going to lose its collective mind, and I'd prefer you conscious to appreciate it." "Who the hell are you?" Her voice came out raw and broken, barely above a whisper. "King Caelthorn Ravwarin." He said it like that should mean something, then louder, turning to face Varric with the kind of smile that had nothing to do with humor. "Sovereign of the Night Dominion, Lord Commander of the Ravaran territories, and apparently the only king in this empire who understands the difference between strength and stupidity." The courtyard exploded into chaos. Varric moved forward 3 steps, his power rolling out in a wave that should have sent every lesser wolf to their knees. Caelthorn didn't even flinch, just stood there between Seraphine and the Alpha King like a wall built from violence and bad intentions. "You forget yourself, Ravaran." Varric's voice had dropped into that register that preceded bloodshed. "This is an internal matter of the Thornfell pack. You have no authority here." "Wrong." Caelthorn's smile widened. "This stopped being an internal matter the second you made it a spectacle for the entire empire. You rejected your fated mate in front of 300 witnesses from a dozen kingdoms. That makes it everyone's business. And since you just declared her worthless and politically irrelevant, you won't mind if I make her a better offer." The rain seemed to pause. Every wolf in that courtyard stopped breathing at the same time. "What did you just say?" Varric's eyes had started to glow, his wolf rising to the surface. "I'm offering her a throne." Caelthorn turned slightly, addressing the crowd now. "Seraphine Vale, rejected and discarded by the great Alpha King, will become Queen of the Night Dominion if she accepts. She'll stand beside me at the Imperial Solstice Summit in 3 months as my equal and partner. Her bloodline will merge with mine. Her wolf will be trained by the finest warriors in my territories, and every kingdom in this empire will learn exactly what kind of strength they're looking at." He turned back to Seraphine, and for the first time she saw something in his storm-gray eyes that wasn't strategy or political maneuvering. It was rage, cold, focused, and absolute. "So what do you say, little wolf? You want to die in this courtyard for a king who thinks you're worthless? Or do you want to live long enough to show him exactly how wrong he is?" She should have been too far gone to answer. The bond severance was still tearing through her chest like broken glass. Her vision kept tunneling in and out, and her wolf was so silent it felt like half her soul had already departed. But somewhere beneath the pain and shock and humiliation, something else stirred. Something that had been sleeping her entire life, waiting for exactly this moment. Not revenge. That would come later. This was simpler. Meaner. This was the part of her that had always known she was stronger than everyone assumed, just waiting for someone to push her far enough to prove it. She looked past Caelthorn to where Varric stood frozen beneath the imperial canopy, his perfect features twisted with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Shock? Rage? Fear that he'd just made a catastrophic mistake? Good. Let him feel it. "I accept," she said. Her voice came out stronger than it had any right to. "Your offer," King Raverin. I accept. Calethorn's smile turned sharp as a blade. Excellent. Then he scooped her up like she weighed nothing, turned on his heel, and started walking toward the courtyard gates. His guards materialized out of the shadows, 8 massive wolves in dark armor that marked them as Raverin elite, and formed a protective wedge around them. Varric's roar shook the palace foundations. Stop! Calethorn didn't even slow down. Actually, Your Majesty, I don't think I will. You just publicly declared this woman worthless, so by your own logic, I'm not taking anything of value, just cleaning up your trash. You should thank me. The Alpha King's power exploded outward in a wave of dominance that sent half the courtyard to their knees. Guards drew weapons. Nobles screamed. Somewhere in the chaos, Corwin was shouting about bond severance and medical intervention and imminent death. Calethorn kept walking, his own power rising to meet Varric's in a clash that made the air crack and shimmer. Seraphine felt it wash over her. 2 alphas on the verge of war, using her as the excuse, and realized with perfect clarity that she'd just traded one kind of danger for something infinitely worse. But at least this danger came with a pulse, with options, with the slim possibility that she might survive long enough to figure out what the hell just happened to her life. The gates of Thornfell Palace slammed shut behind them, with a finality that sounded like the closing of a tomb. Or maybe, if she was lucky, the opening of one. Either way, Seraphine Vale stopped being a discarded mate and became something else entirely. She just wasn't sure yet if that something was a queen or a weapon. Turned out, it didn't matter. In Calethorn's world, they were the same thing. The journey to Raverin Keep took 2 days by horseback through territories that got progressively wilder and more hostile the further north they traveled. Seraphine spent most of the first day unconscious, the bond severance still wreaking havoc on her system, while her body tried to figure out how to function without the metaphysical anchor it had been preparing for. Calethorn's personal physician, a sharp-eyed woman named Mira, who looked like she'd learned medicine on a battlefield, kept her pumped full of herbs and tinctures that tasted like death, but apparently kept actual death at bay. "You're tougher than you look," Mira said on the second morning when Seraphine finally managed to stay conscious for more than 20 minutes at a stretch. Most wolves don't survive rejection from an alpha as powerful as Varric. The bond severance alone should have stopped your heart. "Sorry to disappoint." Seraphine's voice sounded like she'd been gargling gravel. Mira laughed, a short bark of genuine amusement. "Oh, honey, you're not disappointing anyone. Half the camp has money riding on whether you'll make it to the keep alive. You surviving is making me very rich. Glad to be of service." She tried to sit up, realized that was a terrible idea, and settled for turning her head to look out the tent flap at the camp beyond. Calethorn's forces had made night camp in a clearing surrounded by pine forest so thick it looked like the trees were trying to swallow the sky. 30 soldiers, maybe more, all moving with the kind of disciplined efficiency that spoke to real military training rather than ceremonial palace guards. "Where are we?" Seraphine asked. "About 6 hours from Raverin Keep." Mira checked the bandage on Seraphine's wrist, where she'd been drawing blood every few hours to monitor the bond deterioration. "We'll reach the fortress by sunset tomorrow if you can stay upright on a horse. And if I can't, then you ride in the supply wagon with the dried meat and spare weapons. Either way, you're going north." The king was very clear about that. The king. That's what everyone called him. Not Calethorn, not Raverin, just the king, spoken with the kind of respect that couldn't be faked or enforced. These wolves followed him because they wanted to, which in Seraphine's limited experience with royalty was unusual enough to be notable. "Speaking of His Majesty," Mira said, finishing with the bandage, "he wants to see you when you're strong enough to walk 20 feet without collapsing. Says there are things you need to understand before you reach the keep." "Understand about what?" "About why he really pulled you out of that courtyard." Mira's expression went carefully neutral. "And trust me, girl, it wasn't charity." "Yeah," Seraphine said quietly. "I kind of figured." Calethorn's tent sat at the center of camp, larger than the others, but not ostentatiously so. 2 guards flanked the entrance, both of whom nodded to Seraphine as she approached without demanding identification or making her wait. Apparently being the king's new political acquisition came with certain privileges. She pushed through the tent flap and found Calethorn standing over a map table, still wearing the same black coat from the courtyard, now joined by worn leather armor that had seen actual combat. He looked up as she entered, those storm-gray eyes tracking her movement with an intensity that made her wolf, still silent, still absent, try to stir in the back of her mind. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair near the table. "Before you fall down and make Mira's job harder." "I'm fine. You look like death walking." "Sit." She sat, mostly because standing was taking more energy than she wanted to admit, and partly because something about the way he gave orders made her want to comply just to see what happened next. Not submission, curiosity. Calthorne poured 2 glasses of something amber from a bottle on the table and slid one across to her. "It's whiskey. Drink it. It won't cure bond severance, but it'll take the edge off the pain long enough for us to have a conversation." She drank. The whiskey burned going down, harsh and unrefined. Nothing like the smooth, expensive liquor served at Thornfell. It tasted like the North, like survival. "Better?" Calthorne asked. "Not really, but I'm listening." He leaned against the map table, arms crossed, studying her with the same expression she'd seen in the courtyard. Calculation mixed with something darker. "Good. Because we need to establish some ground rules before you walk into my territory thinking you understand what's happening here. You offered me a throne to humiliate Varric." Seraphine met his gaze without flinching. "Seems pretty straightforward. That's part of it." Calthorne's smile was cold. "But if you think humiliating Varric Duskbane is the extent of my ambition, then you're not as smart as I need you to be. Then enlighten me." He moved to the tent flap, checked that the guards were out of earshot, then returned to the table and unrolled a section of the map. It showed the Empire in detail. Dozens of territories marked in different colors representing pack alliances, trade routes, and military positions. 6 years ago, Calthorne said, his finger landing on a small territory near the eastern border. Varric's forces raided a minor pack under my protection. Not for strategic reasons. Not because they posed a threat, but because my younger sister had refused to become a broodmare for one of his generals. She was 17, brilliant, fierce. She told the general exactly where he could shove his political marriage proposal, and Varric decided that kind of disrespect required correction. His jaw tightened, the muscle there jumping with barely controlled rage. They burned the pack house to the ground, killed everyone inside. My sister, her mate, their 3-month-old daughter. Then they salted the earth and claimed it was a training exercise gone wrong. Seraphine's stomach turned over. "I didn't know." "No one knows." Calthorne's voice had gone flat. "Varric is very good at making his atrocities look like accidents or necessary evils. The entire Empire believes he's a strong, effective ruler who does what's required to maintain order. What they don't see is the bodies buried beneath that order. The families destroyed. The wolves crushed under his ambition." He looked up from the map, and for the first time Seraphine saw the full weight of what he'd been carrying. This wasn't political maneuvering. This was personal. This was a man who'd spent 6 years planning revenge and finally found the perfect weapon. "You want to use me to destroy him?" she said. "I want to help you destroy him," Calthorne corrected. "There's a difference. You're the one he rejected in front of the Empire. You're the one whose soul he ripped apart for political convenience. All I'm doing is giving you the tools and resources to make him regret it. And what do you get out of it? Revenge. Justice. Pick whichever word makes you feel better about the alliance." He poured himself more whiskey. "But here's what you need to understand, Seraphine. I'm not asking you to be a puppet or a figurehead. When I offered you a throne, I meant it. You'll stand beside me as an equal at the Solstice Summit. You'll learn to fight, to strategize, to command. You'll become the kind of queen that makes other rulers nervous. And when we finally bring Varric's empire crashing down, you'll do it with your own hands. Why?" The question came out raw. Why go through all this trouble for revenge against a king you could probably just challenge to single combat? Because beating him in a fight proves nothing. Calthorne's smile turned vicious. But systematically dismantling everything he's built? Watching his allies abandon him? Seeing him humiliated in front of the same court where he humiliated you? That's justice. That's the kind of revenge that leaves scars. Seraphine looked at the map, at the intricate web of territories and alliances, and realized she was staring at a war plan 6 years in the making. Calthorne hadn't pulled her from that courtyard on impulse. He'd been waiting for something like this, waiting for Varric to make a mistake big enough to exploit. And she was it. The mistake. The weapon. The key to unraveling an empire. What if I can't do it? She asked quietly. What if I'm actually as weak as Varric said? Thorne moved around the table until he was standing directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the scars on his knuckles and smell the pine and smoke scent that marked him as northern territory. Then you'll die trying, and I'll find another way. But I don't think that's going to happen. Why not? Because weak wolves don't smile at their executioners. His hand came up, tilting her chin so she had to meet his eyes. Weak wolves don't survive bond severance from an alpha as powerful as Varric, and weak wolves definitely don't look at a king offering them revenge and ask what the catch is. You're not weak, Seraphine. You're untrained. There's a difference. The intensity in his gaze should have been intimidating, should have sent her wolf into defensive mode. Instead, something in her chest, something that wasn't the shattered bond or the lingering pain, stirred to life. Recognition, maybe. Or just the realization that for the first time in her life, someone was seeing her as something other than a mistake or an inconvenience. So what happens now, she asked. Now you heal. Tomorrow we reach River and Keep, and the day after that you start training. Kelthorne stepped back, releasing her chin. You have 3 months until the Solstice Summit. That's 90 days to transform from a discarded mate into a queen who can stand in front of the entire empire and make them believe you deserve to be there. Think you can handle it? Seraphine finished her whiskey in one burning swallow and stood up. The tent spun slightly, but she locked her knees and held her ground. Do I have a choice? There's always a choice. Kelthorne's smile was sharp as broken glass. You could walk out of this tent right now, head south, disappear into some neutral territory, and live a quiet life away from all this. No one would stop you. But you won't. Because you didn't survive rejection and bond severance just to hide. You survived because some part of you, the part that smiled at that noble in the courtyard, wants to watch Varric's empire burn. He was right. She hated that he was right. But standing there in a war tent in the middle of nowhere, still wearing the ruins of her ceremonial gown and a borrowed coat, Seraphine felt something she hadn't felt in the courtyard. Hope. Vicious, angry, dangerous hope. Then I guess we have work to do, she said. Kelthorne's grin was pure violence wrapped in royal courtesy. Welcome to the Night Dominion, Your Majesty. Try not to die before we get to the fun part. Kel. Reverend Keep rose from the mountain like it had grown there rather than been built. A massive fortress of black stone and iron that looked designed to withstand everything from siege warfare to divine intervention. Watchtowers pierced the sky at irregular intervals, and the outer walls were thick enough to drive a wagon across. The whole structure radiated the kind of brutal functionality that said whoever built it was more concerned with survival than aesthetics. Seraphine stared up at it from horseback as their column approached the main gates, trying to process the sheer scale. Thornfell Palace had been beautiful in that calculated, intimidating way that royal architecture tended toward. This was different. This was a fortress built by wolves who expected war and planned to win it. Home sweet home, Kelthorne said from beside her, following her gaze. Not as pretty as Thornfell, but significantly harder to breach. Varric's palace would fall in a week under sustained assault. This keep has stood for 3 centuries and never been taken. That's comforting. It should be. You're going to be living here. The gates opened as they approached. Massive iron-reinforced doors that moved silently despite their weight. The courtyard beyond was organized chaos, soldiers training, smiths working forges, servants moving supplies. Everyone stopped what they were doing as Kelthorne's horse entered, heads turning to track the column's progress. And then every single wolf in that courtyard, from the lowest-ranked soldier to what looked like senior commanders, dropped to one knee. Not in submission, in respect. Kelthorne dismounted smoothly and offered Seraphine his hand. She took it, grateful for the support since her legs still weren't entirely reliable, and let him help her down from the horse. A woman approached from the keep's main entrance, older than Mira, but with the same battlefield-hardened look. She wore armor that marked her as high-ranking military, and her gray-streaked black hair was pulled back in a severe braid. "Your Majesty," she said, bowing to Kelthorne. "Welcome back. And this must be our new queen." Her tone made it very clear she had opinions about said new queen, none of them entirely positive. Commander Lyris, Thorne said, may I present Seraphine Vale, future queen of the Night Dominion. Seraphine, this is Commander Lyris Shadowcrest, head of my military forces, and the reason we haven't been invaded in the last decade. Lyris looked Seraphine up and down with the same expression someone might use to evaluate a potentially faulty weapon. Still alive, then? That's better than expected. The bar for success is remarkably low around here, Seraphine said. Lyris's mouth twitched. Might have been the start of a smile. Good. Low expectations make it easier to surprise people. Come on, then. Let's get you cleaned up and assessed before dinner. His Majesty will want you presentable for the court. I have a court? Thorne raised an eyebrow. You have advisors, nobles, and military commanders who need to believe this alliance is real, Lyris said bluntly, which means the girl needs to look like a queen rather than a drowned cat within the next 4 hours. No offense, none taken, Seraphine lied. But the suite they'd prepared for her was larger than her entire living quarters at Thornfell had been. A bedroom with a fireplace big enough to stand in, a sitting room with windows overlooking the mountain valleys, and a bathroom with a tub that could double as a small swimming pool. Servants had already laid out clothes, not the delicate court gowns she'd worn in Varric's territory, but practical leather and wool designed for northern weather. A woman was waiting inside, younger than Lyris, but with the same no-nonsense energy. She introduced herself as Kira, head of the Queen's household staff, which was apparently a thing that existed now. Bath first, Kira said, already moving toward the bathroom. Then we'll do something about your hair and get you into something that doesn't look like you lost a fight with a storm. The court dinner starts in 3 hours and Commander Lyris will have my head if you're not ready. Seraphine followed her into the bathroom and nearly wept at the sight of the steaming water already filling the massive tub. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been properly clean. Kira helped her out of the ruined ceremonial gown, which fell apart in pieces like it had been waiting for permission to die, and then diplomatically turned her back while Seraphine lowered herself into the water. The heat hit like a physical blow. Every muscle she didn't know was tense, suddenly screaming in relief. She sank down until the water reached her chin and just breathed, feeling the layers of rain and road dust and blood dissolve away. You'll want to stay alert, Kira said from across the room. His Majesty's court is different from what you're probably used to. Less protocol, more survival. They'll test you, see if you're worth their loyalty or just another pretty face the king acquired for political leverage. What do you think? Seraphine asked. I think you survived rejection from the Alpha King and made it here alive, which is more than most wolves could manage. Kira's reflection in the mirror showed a slight smile. But surviving and thriving are different things. The court will want to see if you can do both. Any advice? Don't try to be Varric's version of a queen. Be yourself, whatever that is. And don't let Commander Lyris intimidate you. She respects strength, even when it looks like weakness first. That's not exactly reassuring. It wasn't meant to be. Kira turned around, holding up a towel. Welcome to the Night Dominion, Your Majesty. We don't do reassuring here. The court dinner was held in a hall that managed to be both grand and austere at the same time. Long tables arranged in a horseshoe, with Thorne's seat at the head and an empty chair beside him that was obviously meant for Seraphine. 50 wolves, maybe more, already seated and watching as she entered. She'd chosen the simplest outfit Kira had laid out: black leather pants, a deep green tunic, and boots designed for function over fashion. Her hair was still damp, but Kira had managed to tame it into something resembling intentional styling. No jewelry, no crown, just herself, walking into a room full of strangers who were about to judge whether she deserved to be there. Thorne stood as she approached, a gesture of respect that made half the room do the same. He waited until she reached the head table before speaking. Lords and ladies, commanders and counselors, he said, his voice carrying easily across the hall. I present Seraphine Vale, who will stand as Queen of the Night Dominion at the Imperial Solstice Summit. She comes to us from Thornfell, rejected by a king too blind to recognize strength when it's standing in front of him. That's Varric's loss, and our gain. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Not hostile, but not exactly welcoming either. Skeptical, waiting. Seraphine took her seat beside Thorne and immediately felt the weight of dozens of stares. A servant appeared with wine, which she accepted gratefully, And then dinner began with the kind of organized chaos that probably seemed normal to people who lived here. The woman seated to her right, a noble with silver hair and sharp features, leaned over almost immediately. "Lady Ashira Night Whisper," she said. "I control the southern trade routes and own half the mining operations in this territory. Tell me, Your Majesty, what exactly do you bring to this alliance besides a pretty face and a grudge against the Alpha King?" Direct. Aggressive. Exactly the kind of test Kira had warned her about. Seraphine took a sip of wine, buying herself 2 seconds to think. "Right now? Nothing. I'm untrained, politically inexperienced, and still recovering from bond severance that should have killed me. But I'm still alive, which means I'm either incredibly lucky or too stubborn to die. Either way, you'll find out in 3 months whether that's enough." Lady Ashira's eyebrows rose. Then she laughed, sharp and genuine. "Well, at least you're honest. That's more than most royals manage on a good day." Across the table, a massive wolf with scars bisecting his face and arms, like a roadmap of violence, grunted something that might have been approval. "Commander Torin," Kelthorn said, gesturing to the scarred wolf, "leads my northern battalions and has never met a problem he couldn't solve with extreme prejudice." "She tough enough for this?" Torin asked, addressing Kelthorn, but staring at Seraphine. "Ask her yourself." Torin's grin showed too many teeth. "You tough enough for this, girl?" Seraphine met his stare without flinching. "I survived Varric Duskbane, publicly ripping my soul apart in front of 300 witnesses. What exactly do you think you're going to throw at me that's worse than that?" The table went quiet. Torin's grin widened. "I like her. She can stay." Just like that, the tension in the room shifted. Not acceptance, not yet, but acknowledgement. She'd passed the first test. There would be more, dozens more probably, but for now she'd earned enough breathing room to eat dinner without someone trying to prove she didn't belong. Kelthorn leaned over, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Well played. But pace yourself. This is the easy part." "This is the easy part?" Seraphine whispered back. "Wait until tomorrow when Lyra starts your combat training. Then you'll understand why everyone's being so nice tonight." "Fantastic. Can't wait." His smile was sharp. "Liar. You're terrified." He was right, but she was starting to realize that terror and excitement felt remarkably similar when you were standing at the edge of something that would either kill you or change you forever. And as the court dinner continued around her, wolves laughing and arguing and planning in the casual way that suggested they'd been doing this together for years, Seraphine felt something shift inside her chest. Not the bond. That was still shattered, still silent. This was different. This was the first fragile thread of belonging starting to weave itself into place. She was still terrified, still in pain, still had no idea if she'd survive the next 3 months of whatever hell Kelthorn had planned. But for the first time since Varric had torn her world apart, Seraphine Vale felt something other than despair. She felt dangerous, and that was a start. The nightmare started on her 3rd night at Rivarin Keep. Seraphine woke gasping, her sheets soaked with sweat, the ghost of Varric's voice still echoing in her skull. Too weak. No value. Liability. The words had taken on the quality of a curse, repeating in an endless loop that her sleeping mind couldn't escape. She gave up on sleep around 4 in the morning and dressed in the dark, pulling on training clothes and boots before slipping out of her suite. The keep was quiet at this hour, just guards on patrol and the occasional servant preparing for the day ahead. No one stopped her as she made her way down to the training yards. The main courtyard was empty, torches burning in their sconces, frost glittering on the practice weapons racked along the walls. Seraphine grabbed a training sword, lighter than she expected, balanced for speed, and moved to the center of the yard. She had no idea what she was doing, no formal combat training, no muscle memory to draw on. Just rage and insomnia and the desperate need to feel like she was doing something, anything, besides waiting to be transformed into whatever Kelthorn thought she needed to become. The first swing was clumsy, the second barely better. By the 10th, she was breathing hard, her shoulders burning, frustration building with every failed attempt to make the blade do what her mind imagined. "You're gripping too tight." Seraphine spun around to find Commander Lyra standing at the edge of the yard, arms crossed, expression unreadable in the torchlight. The commander was in full armor despite the hour, like she'd either just come off duty or was about to start. "What?" Seraphine asked. Your grip. You're strangling the hilt like it's going to run away. Loosen up. The blade should feel like an extension of your arm, not a foreign object you're trying to control. Seraphine looked at her hand, at the white-knuckle grip she had on the training sword, and forced herself to relax. The blade immediately felt more natural, the weight distributing differently. Better, Lyris said. Again. Why are you helping me? Because I'm awake, you're awake, and watching you flail around like a drunk is painful. Lyris moved into the yard, picking up a training sword of her own. Plus, if you're going to be our queen, I'd prefer you not die the first time someone tries to kill you. Bad for morale. Has anyone tried to kill you? 3 times this month. Lyris's smile was sharp. Comes with the territory. Now show me what you think you know about fighting. The next hour was brutal. Lyris didn't hold back, didn't make concessions for Seraphine's lack of training or the fact that she was still recovering from bond severance. Every mistake was called out, every weakness exploited, until Seraphine was covered in bruises and her arms felt like they might fall off. But she learned. By the time the sun started rising over the mountains, she could hold a basic defensive stance without Lyris correcting her every 3 seconds. Not terrible, Lyris said as they returned the training swords to the rack. You've got good instincts. Terrible technique, but good instincts. We can work with that. Does this mean you don't think I'm completely useless? It means I think you might survive long enough to become useful. Lyris headed toward the keep entrance, then paused. Training starts at dawn tomorrow. If you're late, I'll make you run the mountain stairs until you vomit. Don't be late. She disappeared into the keep before Seraphine could respond, leaving her standing alone in the training yard as the fortress came to life around her. 3 months until the solstice summit, 90 days to transform from discarded mate to queen. Seraphine looked at her bruised knuckles, felt the ache in muscles she didn't know existed, and smiled. Let Varric think she was weak. Let the Empire remember her as the pathetic wolf who got rejected in the rain. They'd learn different soon enough. And when they did, Seraphine was going to make sure every single one of them regretted underestimating her. Starting with the king who thought breaking her would be the end of the story. Turned out it was just the beginning. And beginnings, Seraphine was learning, were where the real monsters were made. The mountain stairs were a vertical nightmare carved into the black rock face behind Raverin Keep. 300 steps that climbed straight up through freezing wind and ice patches that formed overnight. Seraphine hit them at dawn like Lyris had ordered, her legs screaming protest by step 50, her lungs burning by step 100. Commander Lyris ran beside her like gravity was optional, not even breathing hard, her voice cutting through the wind. Faster. If you can't handle stairs, you'll never handle combat. Your body doesn't care that Varric broke your bond. Move. Seraphine pushed harder, felt something tear in her calf muscle, kept going anyway. The pain was clarifying. Better than the nightmares. Better than lying awake remembering Varric's voice declaring her worthless, while 300 wolves watched her die standing up. At the top, she collapsed onto frozen stone and vomited until there was nothing left but bile and the metallic taste of blood in her throat. Lyris handed her a canteen without comment. Tomorrow we do it twice, the commander said. Day after that, 3 times. By the end of the month, you'll run these stairs in full armor without stopping. Drink your water. We start weapons drills in 10 minutes. Seraphine wanted to argue, but her body had moved past words into a space where only survival mattered. She drank. She stood. She followed Lyris back down to the training yard where 6 of Ravarin's elite soldiers were already assembled, each holding weapons that looked designed to cause maximum damage. The next 8 hours were a systematic dismantling of every assumption Seraphine had ever made about fighting. Lyris paired her against soldiers who didn't pull punches or make allowances for the fact that she'd never held a real blade before last week. They hit her. Hard. Every time she dropped her guard or telegraphed a strike, or forgot to watch her footing on uneven ground. By noon, she was bleeding from a split lip and a gash across her forearm where someone's training blade had connected with more force than intended. By sunset, she could barely lift her arms above shoulder height. But she learned. Her body started remembering patterns her mind couldn't articulate yet. How to read an opponent's weight distribution before they committed to a strike. How to use someone's momentum against them when they were bigger and stronger. How to fall without breaking something important and get back up before the next attack landed. You're thinking too much, Lyris said during a water break. Combat isn't chess. You don't have time to plan 3 moves ahead. Your wolf should be handling this instinctively, but since yours is still broken, we're doing it the hard way. Again. Seraphine picked up her training sword and faced the next soldier in rotation, a woman named Kessa, who moved like water and hit like a hammer. They circled each other in the fading light, Seraphine's entire body one massive bruise, her hands shaking from exhaustion. Kessa struck first, a feint towards Seraphine's left that turned into a sweeping leg attack she barely blocked. The impact sent shockwaves up her already abused arms, but she held position, twisted inside Kessa's guard, and landed her first clean hit of the day against the soldier's ribs. Kessa stepped back, surprised. Better. Still sloppy, but better. High praise, Seraphine muttered. From Kessa, Lyris called from across the yard. That's practically a love confession. Hit the baths before dinner. You smell like death, and we have company tonight. What company? The kind that requires you to look like a queen instead of a training accident. Lyris dismissed the soldiers with a gesture. Move. You've got 2 hours. Squat. The company turned out to be a delegation from one of the eastern territories, minor nobility, who'd traveled 3 days to meet the woman who'd somehow survived rejection from the Alpha King. They arrived with gifts and carefully worded questions about Seraphine's intentions, her alliance with Kalethorn, and whether the Night Dominion was planning anything that might destabilize the delicate balance of power currently keeping the Empire from open war. Seraphine sat beside Kalethorn at the head table, wearing a dress Kira had selected that managed to be both elegant and vaguely threatening, and tried not to fall asleep in her chair. Every muscle in her body hurt. The split lip was still bleeding intermittently. She was pretty sure one of her ribs was cracked, but she smiled and nodded and said all the correct diplomatic things, while Kalethorn navigated the political minefield with the ease of someone who'd been doing this since childhood. The delegation left 3 hours later, apparently satisfied that Seraphine wasn't a complete disaster, and the alliance might actually be legitimate. You did well, Kalethorn said after they'd gone, pouring himself whiskey in the now empty hall. They came here expecting to find a broken wolf playing dress-up. Instead, they found someone who looks like she could gut them with a dinner knife if they said the wrong thing. That's progress. I feel like I got trampled by horses. You look like it too. But you didn't flinch once during dinner, even when Lord Corrigan asked if you were planning to reconcile with Varric. That question was designed to provoke a reaction. You gave him nothing. Seraphine accepted the whiskey he poured for her and downed it in one burning swallow. What would you have done if I'd broken down crying or admitted I still loved him? Kalethorn's smile was sharp. I'd have had Corrigan quietly killed for asking and found a new strategy. But I knew you wouldn't break. You're too angry for that. Is that what you're counting on? My anger? Among other things. He refilled both glasses. Anger is useful. It keeps you focused when grief would make you weak. But anger alone won't survive what's coming. You need something stronger. Like what? Purpose. He turned to face her directly, storm gray eyes catching the firelight. Right now you're running on rage and spite, which is fine for getting through training and impressing minor nobles. But the Solstice Summit is 3 months of sustained political warfare. Every ruler in the Empire will be watching for weakness. Varric will be looking for opportunities to destroy you. You need to know exactly why you're doing this and what you're willing to sacrifice to see it through. Seraphine stared at the whiskey in her glass, at the amber liquid that reminded her of Varric's eyes before he destroyed everything. I want him to feel what I felt, standing in that courtyard knowing I was dying and no one was coming to stop it. I want him to understand what it costs to throw away something you can't get back. Good start. Kalethorn leaned against the table. Now go deeper. What happens after he's broken? After his empire falls and he's exiled or dead? What does Seraphine Vale want when revenge is over and you're still standing in the ashes? The question hit harder than any training sword. She'd spent every waking moment since the rejection focused on survival and transformation and the distant goal of watching Varric regret his decision. She hadn't thought past that, hadn't considered what came after the anger burned itself out. I don't know, she admitted quietly. Then figure it out, because the moment you stand beside me at that summit, you stop being a victim of Varric's cruelty and become a queen in your own right. Queens need vision. They need to know what they're building, not just what they're destroying. He finished his drink and stood, heading toward the hall entrance. Training starts at dawn. Don't be late. Wait! Seraphine's voice stopped him at the doorway. Why are you really doing this? And don't give me the revenge speech. There are easier ways to hurt Varric than dragging a broken wolf through 3 months of hell just to parade her in front of the Empire. Kelthorn turned, and for the first time since they'd met, his expression showed something other than calculated strategy. My sister's name was Alara. She was 17 when Varric's forces killed her. Brilliant, fierce, completely fearless. She believed wolves could be better than the brutal hierarchy that puts strength above everything else. That empires could be built on loyalty instead of fear. His jaw tightened. Varric had her burned alive because she dared to suggest his general wasn't entitled to her body just because he outranked her. And when I demanded justice, the Empire told me to accept the loss and move on because challenging the Alpha King over one dead girl would destabilize everything. So yes, this is revenge. But it's also proof that Alara was right. That you can take a wolf everyone declared worthless and transform her into something powerful enough to bring down the king who killed her. That's what I'm building. That's my vision. He left before she could respond, his footsteps echoing down the stone corridor until silence reclaimed the hall. Seraphine sat alone with her whiskey and her bruises and the uncomfortable realization that Kelthorn wasn't just using her as a weapon. He was trying to prove something to himself, trying to validate his sister's death by showing that the Empire's brutal hierarchy could be challenged and beaten. Which meant if Seraphine failed, she wouldn't just be letting herself down. She'd be proving that Varric was right. That strength was the only thing that mattered, and wolves like her and Alara were always going to be crushed beneath it. No pressure. She finished her drink and headed to her suite, every step a reminder that her body was not designed for the punishment Lyris was putting it through. But pain was clarifying. Pain meant she was still alive, still fighting, still becoming something other than the broken wolf who'd stood in the rain waiting to die. The weeks blurred together into a rhythm of brutal training, political education, and strategic planning. Lyris pushed her harder every day, adding weight to her runs, complexity to the combat drills, unpredictability to the sparring sessions. Seraphine stopped counting bruises and started measuring progress by how long she could hold her ground against Ravaren's elite soldiers. Lady Ashira took over her political education, drilling her on imperial history, alliance structures, and the intricate web of favors and grudges that held the empire together. The mining baroness had a mind like a steel trap and zero patience for mistakes. Tell me why the Eastern Territories hate Varric, she'd demand during their afternoon sessions. Because he raised taxes on mineral exports without consulting their council, Seraphine would answer, reciting from memory. Wrong. That's what he did. I asked why they hate him. Lady Ashira's sharp eyes missed nothing. Think like a ruler, not a student. Why does that decision matter? Because it showed he doesn't respect their autonomy. He treats allied territories like possessions instead of partners. Better. Now tell me how we use that resentment. And so it went, day after day, transforming her from a wolf who barely understood imperial politics into someone who could navigate the dangerous currents of power and manipulation that defined royal courts. Kelthorn trained her differently. Their sessions happened late at night in his private study, just the two of them, and a map table covered in constantly shifting markers representing territories, alliances, and potential threats. He taught her how empires were really ruled, not through military might or political marriages, though those mattered, but through information, leverage, and the careful application of pressure on exactly the right weak points. Varric's empire looks solid from the outside, he explained one night, moving markers across the map. But it's actually held together by fear and financial manipulation. The moment his allies realize he's been embezzling from the imperial treasury to fund his own expansion, the whole structure collapses. How do we prove it? We already have proof. Documents, testimonies, financial records showing years of fraud. The hard part is revealing it at exactly the right moment for maximum damage. He looked up from the map. That's where you come in. Me? You're living proof that Varric makes catastrophic decisions when his ego is threatened. Rejecting his fated mate in front of the Empire was politically insane. It showed weakness disguised as strength. At the summit, we use that. We present you as evidence that the great Alpha King is fallible, desperate, and losing control. Then we hit him with the financial corruption while his credibility is already damaged. And if he tries to kill me before we can expose him, Calethorn's smile was cold. Then he proves our point about being unstable and dangerous, and the Empire turns against him anyway. Either way, he loses. The casual certainty with which Calethorn discussed her potential murder should have been disturbing. Instead, Seraphine found it almost comforting. At least someone was thinking 3 moves ahead while she was still trying to survive the current one. Their working relationship had settled into something complicated. Not quite friendship. Too strategic to be trust. But there was respect there now. Recognition. 2 wolves who'd both lost something to Varric's cruelty and were determined to make him pay for it. Sometimes, late at night when the sessions ran long and the whiskey bottles emptied themselves, Calethorn would talk about Alara. Not the sanitized version he'd told the court, but the real girl. How she'd loved storms and hated politics, and once punched a visiting prince for suggesting women shouldn't train in combat. How her laugh could fill an entire room, and her temper could clear it just as fast. She would have liked you, he said once, staring at the map without really seeing it. You're exactly the kind of stubborn, fierce, absolutely infuriating wolf she always wanted as an ally. I'm honored. Seraphine had learned not to deflect when he opened up like this. The vulnerability was rare and clearly cost him something to show. Don't be. Alara's allies tended to end up in dangerous situations because she had no sense of self-preservation. His smile was sad. I spent half my adolescence pulling her out of fights she'd started with wolves twice her size. Sounds familiar. That's what worries me. Their eyes met across the map table, and something shifted in the air between them. Not the bond. That was still shattered, still silent in Seraphine's chest where it should have been. This was different. This was the dangerous territory between alliance and something closer to actual connection. Calethorn looked away first, gathering up documents with more focus than necessary. It's late. You should rest. Lyris has you running the mountain at dawn. She always has me running the mountain at dawn. Exactly. Go. Seraphine left, but the moment stayed with her. The way he'd looked at her, the way her pulse had kicked up despite the exhaustion and the bruises and the complete absence of any romantic feelings she could identify. Dangerous. This whole thing was getting dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with Varric or the Empire or the upcoming summit. She pushed it aside and focused on training, on getting stronger, on becoming the weapon Calethorn needed her to be. Everything else could wait. 6 weeks into her transformation, a messenger arrived from Thornfell. The entire keep went on alert the moment the rider entered the courtyard wearing Varric's colors. Soldiers surrounded him before he'd fully dismounted, weapons drawn, while Lyris personally searched him for hidden threats. He's carrying a sealed letter addressed to Seraphine Vale. Lyris reported to Calethorn. No weapons, no obvious magical triggers, but I don't trust anything that comes from that palace. Bring him to the throne room, Calethorn ordered, and get Seraphine. She should be present for this. 10 minutes later, Seraphine stood beside Calethorn's throne, while the messenger knelt in the center of the hall, surrounded by armed guards and the weight of 60 hostile stares from assembled court members who'd gathered to witness this development. The messenger was young, maybe 20, and looked absolutely terrified. Smart kid. Speak, Calethorn commanded. The messenger produced a sealed letter, his hands shaking slightly. His Majesty King Varric Duskbane sends greetings to the Night Dominion and requests that this message be delivered directly to Seraphine Vale, formerly of Thornfell. Formerly. Like she'd died. Like the rejection had erased her existence completely. Seraphine stepped forward and took the letter, broke the seal, and read while the entire hall held its breath. The contents were exactly what she'd expected, and somehow still managed to make her blood run cold. Varric was demanding she return to Thornfell immediately to face formal charges of bond abandonment and imperial treason. He claimed her alliance with Calethorn constituted an act of war against the Empire, and that her presence at the upcoming Solstice Summit would be considered a hostile action requiring military response. The letter ended with what was clearly meant to be a threat disguised as mercy. Return within 7 days and submit to imperial judgment, or face consequences that will extend beyond your own life to anyone foolish enough to harbor you. He's threatening the Night Dominion, Seraphine said quietly. Threatening Calethorn for taking me in. Let him threaten. Calethorn's voice was ice. What does the letter say specifically? She read it aloud, every word landing like a hammer strike in the silent hall. By the time she finished, several of the court members were on their feet, hands on weapons, ready to march south and burn Thornfell to ash. Commander Lyris was the first to speak. This is a formal declaration of hostilities. We should mobilize the northern battalions and secure our borders before, No. Calethorn cut her off. That's exactly what he wants. Varric is trying to provoke us into military action so he can claim we're the aggressors. He needs justification for attacking the Night Dominion, and we're not giving it to him. Then what do we do? Lady Ashira demanded. Ignore threats against our sovereign territory? We respond with words, not weapons. Calethorn stood, and the entire hall fell silent. Seraphine will attend the Solstice Summit as planned, standing beside me as Queen of the Night Dominion. We'll present our evidence of Varric's corruption to the entire Imperial Council, and when he inevitably tries to silence us with violence, the other rulers will see him for what he is. A tyrant losing control. And if he sends assassins before the summit? Commander Torin asked. If he decides killing her is easier than facing her accusations? Then we kill them first. Calethorn's smile was sharp. Double the guard rotations. No one enters or leaves this keep without thorough screening, and Seraphine doesn't go anywhere without armed escort until we reach the summit. He turned to the messenger who'd been kneeling this whole time looking like he wanted to melt into the floor. Tell your king that Seraphine Vale is under the protection of the Night Dominion and will not be returning to Thornfell for trial or any other purpose. Tell him his threats are noted and will be addressed at the proper venue. And tell him that if he sends another messenger to my territory, I'll send back their head in a box. The messenger went even paler. Your Majesty, I'm just delivering. I know, that's why you get to leave alive. Go. The kid didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled to his feet and practically ran for the exit, leaving the sealed letter on the floor like it might explode. Court dismissed, Calethorn said. Commander Lyris with me. Lady Ashira, start reaching out to Eastern Territory contacts. I want to know how Varric is spinning this narrative. Everyone else, back to your posts. The hall emptied rapidly, nobles and soldiers dispersing to carry out their orders. Seraphine stood frozen beside the throne, still holding Varric's letter, her mind racing. He'd threatened Calethorn, threatened the entire keep, because of her. Because she dared to survive his rejection and become something other than a cautionary tale. This is my fault, she said. No. Calethorn's hand landed on her shoulder, solid and grounding. This is Varric showing his hand too early. He's scared, Seraphine. Scared of what you represent. Scared that watching you rise will inspire other wolves to question his authority. That letter isn't a threat. It's a confession of weakness. It doesn't feel weak. It feels like he's about to burn this entire territory to the ground. Let him try. Calethorn's eyes were steel. We've been preparing for war since the day I brought you here. If Varric wants to fight, we'll give him one. But we'll do it smart. We'll do it in front of witnesses. And we'll make sure when it's over, the entire empire knows exactly who the real monster is. That night, Seraphine couldn't sleep. She lay in her suite, staring at the ceiling, replaying Varric's letter over and over in her mind. The formal language, the barely concealed rage, the threat against anyone harboring her that basically painted a target on every wolf in Reverin Keep. Around midnight, she gave up on rest and went to the training yard, needing to hit something until her hands bled and her mind stopped spinning. Calethorn was already there. He stood in the center of the yard in training clothes, moving through sword forms with the kind of lethal precision that marked someone who'd been fighting since childhood. Seraphine watched from the shadows for a moment, struck by the controlled violence in every movement. This wasn't practice. This was preparation. Can't sleep either? She asked, stepping into the torchlight. Calethorn didn't stop moving, just incorporated her presence into his awareness. Not with that letter burning a hole in my strategy. Varric moved faster than I expected. I thought we'd have another month before he tried something this aggressive. So what do? We accelerate the timeline. He finished the form and lowered his blade. The Solstice Summit is in 6 weeks. That's not enough time to complete your training properly, but it'll have to be. Starting tomorrow, we shift focus from building skills to polishing presentation. You need to look like a queen who's been ruling for years, not months. I can barely hold my own against Kessa in sparring. You won't need to fight at the summit. You need to stand beside me looking dangerous, controlled, and completely untouchable while I systematically destroy Varric's credibility. Think you can manage that? Seraphine picked up a training sword from the rack. Let's find out. They fought for the next hour, Calethorn testing her defenses while calling out corrections and adjustments. He didn't hold back the way Lyris sometimes didn't make allowances for her exhaustion or the stress of the day, just pushed her harder, faster, until she was operating on pure instinct. She lost every single exchange, but she learned from each one, started reading his patterns, started anticipating moves before he committed to them. Better, Calethorn said after disarming her for the 6th time. You're still too defensive, but that's fixable. Again. They reset, faced each other across the yard. Seraphine's entire body hurt and her hands were blistered from the sword grip, but she raised her blade anyway. This time when Calethorn attacked, she didn't just defend. She countered, using one of Lyris's favorite tricks to redirect his momentum and create an opening. Her blade kissed his ribs before he could adjust. They froze. First point, Seraphine said quietly. Calethorn's smile was genuine surprise. Well, maybe you're ready after all. Something in his expression made her pulse kick, the way he was looking at her, not like a weapon or a political tool, like something else entirely, something that had nothing to do with strategy, and everything to do with the two of them standing too close in torchlight, with adrenaline still singing through their veins. Seraphine stepped back fast, lowering her sword. It's late. I should stay. The word came out rougher than he probably intended. We need to talk about what happens if Varric doesn't wait for the summit. If he sends wolves to kill you before we can expose him. Then I die and you find another strategy. Not acceptable. Why? She turned to face him directly. You said yourself I'm just one piece of a larger plan. If I'm gone, you adapt. You've been planning revenge for 6 years. Surely you have contingencies. Calethorn set down his training sword with deliberate care. When I started this, you were a contingency, a convenient weapon, a way to hurt Varric where it would damage him most. But that's not what you are anymore. Then what am I? The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them seemed ready to address. You're someone who reminds me why I started this in the first place, Calethorn said finally. Alara believed wolves could be better than what the Empire made them. You're proof she was right. That strength isn't about domination. That power can come from surviving instead of conquering. He moved closer, and Seraphine's breath caught. This wasn't strategic. This was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with politics or revenge. If Varric kills you, Calethorn continued quietly, it won't just destroy my plan. It'll prove that he was right. That wolves like you and Alara don't survive in his world. And I can't... He stopped, jaw tight. I won't let that happen. So what are you saying? I'm saying that somewhere between the courtyard and now, this stopped being about revenge and started being about keeping you alive. And I don't know when that shift happened, but it did. Seraphine should have stepped back, should have reminded him this was an alliance built on mutual need, not actual connection, should have protected the professional distance that kept things simple. Instead, she heard herself say, good, because I'm not planning on dying. Good. His hand came up, fingers brushing her jaw with shocking gentleness for someone who fought like violence was a native language. Then don't. They stood like that for a heartbeat, then two, on the edge of something that would complicate everything. Then Calethorn pulled back, his expression shuddering. 6 weeks, he said, his voice back to business. We have 6 weeks to make you untouchable. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we start the real work. He left the training yard without looking back, leaving Seraphine standing alone with her racing pulse and the uncomfortable realization that this alliance had just become infinitely more dangerous than any threat Varric could send. Because somewhere between the rejection and the transformation, she'd stopped seeing Calethorn as just a means to revenge, and that was the kind of complication that got people killed. Indeed. The next 6 weeks were a controlled frenzy of preparation. Calethorn's network of spies and informants spread across the Empire, feeding back information about Varric's movements, his political alliances, and the growing whispers that something was wrong with the Imperial Treasury. Lady Ashira worked her Eastern Territory contacts, building support among rulers who were starting to question the Alpha King's integrity. Meanwhile, Seraphine transformed. Lyris pushed her through advanced combat training, teaching her not just how to fight, but how to move like someone who expected violence and knew how to handle it. How to walk into a room and make every wolf present reassess whether attacking her was worth the risk. Lady Ashira drilled her on political strategy until she could navigate court intrigue without conscious thought. How to turn a compliment into a weapon. How to smile while destroying someone's credibility. How to make allies out of enemies and enemies out of former friends. Kelthorne trained her in the specific art of imperial politics, using their late-night sessions to role-play scenarios she'd face at the summit. He played Varric, attacking her credibility and her right to be there. She learned to counter with cold precision instead of emotional reaction. "Your bond with him is broken," Kelthorne would say in Varric's voice. "You have no claim to imperial standing." "My bond was broken by his public rejection," she'd counter, "which makes me either a victim of his cruelty or proof of his catastrophic judgment. Pick whichever version damages him more and run with it. Better. Again." They'd run the scenarios over and over until her responses became automatic, until she could face down the Alpha King's accusations without flinching. But beneath the training and preparation, tension was building. Varric sent 3 more letters, each more threatening than the last. The final one arrived 2 weeks before the summit and didn't bother with formal language anymore. "Return what you stole from me, or I will take everything you value and burn it to ash." Not a political threat, a personal one. Kelthorne burned the letter in the throne room fireplace while the entire court watched. Message received. "Now watch what happens when you threaten mine." The word landed like a hammer. Mine. Not the Night Dominions, not the Alliances. His. Seraphine felt that claim settle into her bones like a brand she hadn't asked for, but didn't entirely reject either. 3 days before they were scheduled to leave for the summit, an assassin made it past the outer defenses. Seraphine was in her suite reviewing documents when the window exploded inward in a shower of glass, and a wolf in dark armor rolled into the room with blades already drawn. Training took over. She grabbed the letter opener from her desk, not a real weapon, but sharp enough, and met the first strike with a block that would have made Lyris proud. The assassin was fast, professional, clearly expensive talent hired specifically to kill her before the summit. They fought across the suite, destroying furniture and scattering papers. Seraphine's entire focus narrowed to survival. She was outmatched, knew it within the first 30 seconds. The assassin had decades of experience and training she couldn't match in 6 weeks. But Lyris had taught her how to survive when outmatched, how to make the opponent work for every inch, how to stay alive long enough for help to arrive. The assassin's blade opened a gash across her ribs just as the suite doors exploded inward, and Kelthorne burst through with 6 guards behind him. What followed was over in seconds. The assassin tried to run, made it 3 steps, and went down under a coordinated strike from Kelthorne and Commander Torin that left them very dead and very identifiable. Varric's personal sigil on the armor. Lady Ashira examined the corpse with clinical detachment. "He's not even bothering to hide it anymore." Kelthorne knelt beside Seraphine, his hands already checking the wound. "How bad?" "Not deep," she grimaced. "Hurts, though. Mira, now." He scooped her up before she could protest and carried her toward the door. "And someone lock this wing down. I want to know how that assassin got past our defenses, and I want names." The next hour was a blur of Mira's efficient medical treatment and Kelthorne pacing the infirmary like a caged predator while Lyris reported on the security breach. Turned out the assassin had bribed one of the newer guards, a wolf who'd been at the keep less than a month. The guard didn't survive questioning. "This changes things," Commander Lyris said once Mira had finished stitching Seraphine's ribs. "Varric's willing to commit open murder before the summit. We need to reconsider the timeline." "No." Seraphine sat up despite Mira's protest. "We go as planned. If we delay, Varric wins. He wants us scared, wants us hiding. I'm not giving him that." "You nearly died tonight," Kelthorne said quietly. "Nearly isn't the same as actually." She met his eyes. "You taught me that empires are built on leverage and information. Well, now we have both. Varric just sent an assassin with his personal sigil into your territory. That's proof of guilt we can show the entire Imperial Council." "She's right," Lady Ashira said from the doorway. "This is exactly what we needed, evidence that Varric's lost control, that he's willing to violate diplomatic immunity and commit murder to silence opposition." Kelthorne's jaw was tight, but he nodded slowly. "Fine. We leave for the summit as scheduled. But Seraphine doesn't leave this keep without a full security detail, and when we get to the summit grounds, she stays in sight of witnesses at all times. Understood? Understood. The meeting dissolved, leaving Seraphine alone with Thorne and Mira, who was packing up medical supplies with pointed disapproval of everyone's life choices. You could have been killed, Thorne said once Mira left, but I wasn't. Seraphine swung her legs off the exam table, testing the bandaged ribs. Your training worked. Lyris's training worked. I held off a professional assassin long enough for help to arrive. That's progress. That's not progress. That's you almost dying because I dragged you into this. She crossed the infirmary until she was standing directly in front of him, close enough to see the genuine fear in his eyes that he was trying to mask with anger. You didn't drag me anywhere. I chose this. Chose revenge. Chose transformation. And I'm choosing to see it through. Even if it kills you, especially if it kills me. Because at least I'll die fighting instead of broken in a courtyard waiting for someone to care. The words hung between them, raw and honest and infinitely dangerous. Thorne's hand came up, cupping her face with a gentleness that contradicted the violence in his eyes. Someone cares. In case that wasn't clear. Then help me finish this. Help me stand in front of the Empire and prove that Varric was wrong, that I wasn't weak, that his rejection was his mistake, not my failure. I can do that. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. But Seraphine, if we do this, if we walk into that summit and publicly destroy him, there's no going back. He'll come after you with everything he has. The Empire will fracture, people will die, and some of that blood will be on your hands. I know. Can you live with that? She thought about Alara, burned alive for refusing to submit. Thought about every wolf Varric had crushed under his ambition. Thought about the girl standing in the rain with her soul torn apart while nobles laughed. Yes, she said, I can live with it. Can you? Thorne's smile was sharp and sad and absolutely certain. I've been living with it for 6 years. What's a little more blood between allies? They stood like that for a long moment, on the edge of admitting this had become something more than alliance, something infinitely more dangerous than strategy. Then Seraphine stepped back, breaking the moment before it could complicate things further. 3 days until the summit. We should both get sleep. Seraphine. His voice stopped her at the door. She turned. When this is over, Thorne said quietly, when Varric is broken and the Empire is rebuilt and you don't need me anymore. What then? The question hit like a physical blow, because he was asking what she'd been avoiding since that night in the training yard. What happened when revenge was finished and they were just two wolves who'd built something together in the space between vengeance and trust? I don't know, she admitted. Ask me after the summit. Fair enough. She left the infirmary and headed back to her suite, every step a reminder that in 3 days she'd be standing in front of the entire imperial court beside the king who'd saved her life. And somewhere across the Empire, Varric was preparing to destroy her. The point of no return was approaching fast, and Seraphine was done running from it. The Imperial Solstice Summit was held at Crystalline Hall, a neutral territory carved into the heart of the Empire where no single ruler could claim dominance. The structure itself was a marvel of architecture and intimidation, built from translucent stone that caught light and threw it back in fractured rainbows. During the day, it looked like frozen starlight. At night, it became something darker, all sharp edges and shadows that could hide 1,000 threats. Seraphine stood at the window of their assigned quarters, watching the arrival of delegations from across the Empire. Banners from a dozen territories snapped in the winter wind. Guards in ceremonial armor lined the approaches. Nobles and dignitaries streamed through the main gates in a river of silk and steel and barely concealed hostility. Somewhere in that crowd was Varric. Her chest tightened at the thought, the phantom pain of the shattered bond flaring like an old wound in cold weather. 6 weeks of training, preparation, and transformation, all leading to this moment. Standing in front of the Empire beside Thorne and proving she deserved to be there. You're thinking too loud, Thorne said from behind her. I can practically hear the anxiety from across the room. Just mentally preparing. He moved to stand beside her at the window, his presence solid and grounding in a way she'd stopped questioning weeks ago. This changed from alliance to something else the night she'd nearly died, and they'd both been carefully not discussing it ever since. He'll try to provoke you, Calethorn said quietly, in front of everyone. That's his opening move. Make you lose composure, prove you're too emotional and unstable to stand as queen. Don't give him that. I won't. And when we present the evidence of his corruption, he'll deny everything and attack our credibility. That's when you need to be coldest. Most controlled. Let him rage while you stand there looking like you expected exactly this reaction. Seraphine nodded, running through the scenarios they'd practiced. Every possible attack, every counter, every way this could go wrong, and how to survive it anyway. A knock at the door interrupted them. Commander Lyris entered without waiting for permission, her expression grim. "We have a problem," she said. "Of course we do." Calethorn turned from the window. "What kind?" "The Eastern Territory delegation just arrived. Lord Corrigan is with them." "And?" "And he's asking to meet privately with Seraphine before the opening ceremony. Says he has information about Varric's plans that she needs to hear." Calethorn's jaw tightened. "It's a trap." "Probably," Lyris agreed. "But if we refuse, it makes us look like we're hiding something. And Corrigan has influence with the Eastern rulers we need on our side. So we spring the trap carefully." Seraphine moved away from the window. "I'll meet with him. In a public location with witnesses. See what he's actually after." "Absolutely not." Calethorn's voice had dropped into that register that preceded violence. "Corrigan was at Thornfell when Varric rejected you. He's loyal to the Alpha King. This is either an assassination attempt or a setup to discredit you before we even reach the opening ceremony. Or it's a genuine defection." Seraphine met his eyes. "You said yourself that Varric's allies are starting to question him. Maybe Corrigan is one of them, and maybe he's bait designed to get you alone and vulnerable. Then I won't be alone. I'll bring Lyris and 2 guards. We'll meet in the central garden where there are always witnesses. If Corrigan tries anything, we kill him and add it to the list of charges against Varric. The plan was risky. Calethorn knew it, Seraphine knew it, but they were out of time and options, and intelligence about Varric's strategy could mean the difference between winning this summit and leaving in a body bag. "Fine," Calethorn said finally, "but I'm coming too. We go together or not at all." "Wosug." The central garden was exactly what it sounded like. A massive courtyard filled with winter-dead plants and frozen fountains surrounded by covered walkways where nobles gathered to gossip between formal sessions. A dozen wolves were scattered throughout the space when Seraphine and Calethorn arrived with their security detail, enough witnesses to make open violence complicated. Lord Corrigan waited near the fountain at the garden center, looking older than Seraphine remembered. Stress lines carved deep around his eyes, his shoulders carrying tension that spoke to sleepless nights and hard decisions. "Your Majesties," he said, bowing to them both. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "You have 5 minutes," Calethorn said. "Speak." Corrigan glanced at the guards positioned around them, then seemed to make a decision. "I'll be direct. King Varric knows about the financial evidence you plan to present. He knows the Eastern Territories have been feeding you information, and he's prepared a counterattack that will destroy your credibility before you can expose his corruption." "How does he know?" Seraphine asked. "Because someone in your inner circle has been reporting to him since the day you arrived at Ravaran Keep." The words landed like a blade between her ribs. A spy. Someone she'd been training with, eating with, trusting for the past 6 weeks had been feeding information directly to Varric. "Impossible," Calethorn said, but his voice lacked certainty. "My court is loyal. I've known most of them for years." Corrigan's expression was sympathetic. "That's what makes betrayal effective, Your Majesty. It comes from people you trust." "Who?" The question came out harder than Seraphine intended. "Give me a name." "I don't have one." Corrigan spread his hands. "I only know what I've overheard in Varric's War Council. Someone inside Ravaran Keep has been sending detailed reports about your preparations, your strategy, even your personal conversations. Varric knows everything you're planning to do at this summit. Then why tell us?" Calethorn moved closer, his power rolling out in a wave of dominance that made several nearby nobles back away fast. "What do you gain from warning us about this?" "I gain a clean conscience." Corrigan held his ground, which was either brave or suicidal. "I stood in that courtyard 6 weeks ago and watched Varric destroy his fated mate for political convenience. I told myself it was necessary, that the Empire required hard choices. But then he sent assassins to kill a woman who'd done nothing except survive his cruelty. That's not strength. That's cowardice. His hands clenched. My daughter is 17, the same age as the Ravaran girl Varric had burned for refusing his general. I keep thinking, what if she said no to the wrong wolf? What if she challenged someone powerful and Varric decided to make an example of her too? So you're defecting, Lyra said flatly. I'm choosing a side. Corrigan looked at Seraphine directly. Varric will present evidence at tonight's opening ceremony that you orchestrated your own rejection as part of a long-term plot with King Kael'thorn to destabilize the Empire. He has forged letters, fabricated testimonies, and a witness who will claim you approached Ravaran forces weeks before the bonding ceremony. That's insane, Seraphine said. No one will believe. They'll believe enough to create doubt. Corrigan cut her off. That's all Varric needs. Enough uncertainty about your motives to discredit the corruption evidence when you present it. The Eastern rulers will think you're just a scorned mate manufacturing charges for revenge. The trap was elegant, vicious, exactly the kind of strategy that had kept Varric in power for decades. Attack the messenger's credibility so thoroughly that the message became irrelevant. What's the witness claiming? Kael'thorn asked. That Seraphine approached them months ago asking about weaknesses in Thornfell's defenses. That she specifically requested information about how to access the Imperial Treasury records. Varric will argue that the entire bonding ceremony was staged to give her an excuse to flee to Ravaran territory with stolen intelligence. It was a complete fabrication. But it was also just plausible enough to work. The Empire wanted to believe Varric was strong and competent. Wanted to believe the Alpha King was too smart to be fooled by a low-ranking wolf. If they could blame Seraphine for orchestrating her own rejection, it absolved Varric of making a catastrophic mistake. We need to identify the spy, Lyra said. Now, before they can report this conversation to Varric. Too late for that. Corrigan's smile was bitter. I guarantee someone is already on their way to tell him I met with you, which means you have maybe 2 hours before Varric moves up his timeline and presents his counter-evidence at the opening ceremony instead of waiting for you to act first. Kael'thorn's expression had gone cold, calculating. Then we accelerate our own timeline. Present the corruption evidence immediately before he can undermine Seraphine's credibility. With a spy in your court? Corrigan shook his head. Whoever it is will know your plan and warn Varric. He'll be ready. Then we change the plan entirely. Seraphine's mind was racing, putting pieces together. We stop trying to play defense and go on full attack. Forget the careful political strategy. We walk into that opening ceremony and call Varric out directly in front of the entire Empire. Force him to respond immediately without time to prepare. That's suicide, Lyra said bluntly. Maybe. Seraphine looked at Kael'thorn. But it's also the last thing he'll expect. He thinks we're going to follow protocol, build our case carefully, present evidence through proper channels. If we throw all that out and challenge him directly, we take away his preparation time. Kael'thorn studied her for a long moment, storm-gray eyes weighing variables she couldn't see. It's risky as hell. If the Empire thinks we're being reckless or emotional, we lose everything. We're already losing, Seraphine countered. Corrigan just told us Varric knows our strategy and has a spy feeding him intelligence. Playing it safe gets us killed. Going aggressive might too, but at least we'll die making him work for it. The ghost of a smile crossed Kael'thorn's face. You sound like Alara. She always wanted to fight first and strategize later. Did it work? Usually got her in trouble. But occasionally, it was brilliant. He turned to Lyris. Get our delegation assembled. We're attending the opening ceremony and we're bringing the corruption evidence. All of it. Documents, testimonies, everything. You're serious about this? Lyris asked. Deadly serious. Kael'thorn's smile was sharp. Varric wants a war? We'll give him one. Right there in front of every ruler in the Empire. Corrigan backed away slowly. I've told you what I know. The rest is your decision. But for what it's worth, I hope you burn his empire to ash. He disappeared into the crowd before anyone could respond, leaving them standing in the frozen garden with the weight of impossible choices pressing down like winter sky. 2 hours until the opening ceremony. 2 hours to prepare for a confrontation that would either destroy Varric or get them all killed. Seraphine felt her wolf stir for the first time since the rejection, a faint presence in the back of her mind that had been silent for weeks. Not the bond. That was still shattered beyond repair, but something else. The part of her that had survived broken in a courtyard and decided death was optional. "Let's go to war," she said quietly. Kelthorne's hand found hers, squeezed once. "Welcome to the revolution, Your Majesty. Try not to die in the first 5 minutes." The opening ceremony was held in Crystalline Hall's main amphitheater, a massive circular space designed to hold 500 wolves comfortably. Every seat was filled. Rulers from across the empire sat in designated sections with their advisors and guards, while lesser nobility packed the upper galleries. The air tasted like tension and expensive wine. Seraphine entered beside Kelthorne, wearing the crown he'd given her 2 days ago, black silver and moonstone that caught the light and threw it back cold. Her dress was deep green leather and silk that moved like water, designed to look both regal and vaguely threatening. She'd learned the art of weaponizing appearance over the past 6 weeks, and tonight she was dressed to kill. Every head turned as they walked down the central aisle toward their assigned seats. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through dead grass. Some faces showed curiosity, others hostility. A few looked genuinely shocked that she'd had the audacity to show up at all. And then she saw Varric. He sat in the Alpha King's position at the eastern edge of the amphitheater, elevated above everyone else in a throne carved from white marble veined with gold. He looked exactly like she remembered. Perfect. Powerful. Absolutely untouchable in his ceremonial armor that probably cost more than most territories' annual revenue. Their eyes met across the crowd, and the phantom pain in her chest spiked hard enough to make her stumble. Kelthorne's hand steadied her immediately, a gesture subtle enough that most wouldn't notice, but clear enough that Varric definitely did. The Alpha King's expression didn't change, but something cold and furious moved behind his eyes. Possessive rage that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with losing something he'd considered his property. "Steady," Kelthorne murmured. "Don't give him anything." Seraphine locked her knees and kept walking, every step a declaration that she belonged here despite what Varric had done. They took their seats in the western section reserved for the Night Dominion delegation, surrounded by Lyris, Commander Torin, Lady Ashira, and a dozen other wolves who'd become something like family over the past 6 weeks. The ceremony began with standard protocol. The summit chancellor, an ancient wolf who'd presided over these gatherings for 40 years, stood at the central podium and delivered opening remarks about unity and cooperation and the strength of the empire. All lies, of course. Everyone in this room hated at least 3 other delegations and was probably planning how to undermine them before the summit ended. After the formalities, the floor opened for official grievances and territorial disputes. Standard business. 2 minor kingdoms argued about fishing rights. An eastern territory accused their neighbor of sabotaging trade routes. Nothing that mattered. Then Varric stood. The entire amphitheater went silent. When the Alpha King spoke, you listened or you risked your throat. Honored rulers and esteemed delegates, Varric's voice carried perfectly across the space, resonant with authority. Before we proceed with standard business, I must address a matter that threatens the very foundation of this summit and the empire it represents. Here it comes. Seraphine felt Kelthorne tense beside her. 6 weeks ago, Varric continued, I made a decision that I believe served the Empire's best interests. I rejected my fated mate, Seraphine Vale, on the grounds that our bond posed a security risk I could not ignore. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This was not standard opening ceremony material. What I did not reveal at the time, out of mercy and a foolish hope that discretion might protect her, was the evidence I had uncovered. Evidence that Seraphine Vale had been conspiring with King Kelthorne Ravarin for months prior to our bonding ceremony. That the entire sacred ritual was a calculated deception designed to infiltrate Thornfell Palace and steal Imperial intelligence. The amphitheater exploded into chaos. Nobles shouting questions, guards moving to defensive positions, rulers demanding proof or calling for silence. Seraphine sat frozen, her mind racing to process what was happening. Varric had moved first. Corrigan's warning had given them 2 hours, but Varric had used the opening ceremony itself to launch his attack, knowing they'd be present but unable to respond immediately without violating protocol. Brilliant. Vicious. Exactly what she should have expected. I have documentation, Varric said, his voice cutting through the noise. Letters exchanged between the accused and Ravarin agents, testimonies from witnesses who saw them meeting in secret, financial records showing payments made from the Night Dominion treasury to operatives in Thornfell. He produced a folder, held it up for the assembly to see. All of it will be made available for review. But the evidence is clear. Seraphine Vale is not a victim of my cruelty. She is an agent of a rival kingdom who attempted to deceive the Alpha King and compromise imperial security. This is insane, someone shouted from the Eastern delegation. You're accusing your fated mate of espionage? I'm accusing a wolf who pretended to be my fated mate of treason, Varric corrected coldly. The bond was fraudulent from the beginning, a deception made possible by dark magic provided by Revoran forces. Now he was claiming the bond itself was fake, that their connection had never been real. The lie was so massive, so audacious, that part of Seraphine almost admired the sheer scope of his willingness to rewrite reality. Calethorn started to stand, but Seraphine grabbed his arm. Wait, let him finish. Because she could see something Varric couldn't. The Eastern rulers weren't buying this completely. Lord Corrigan sat among them looking sick but resolute. Several others were whispering among themselves, skeptical frowns suggesting they found this explanation a little too convenient. Varric needed to overplay his hand, needed to push the accusation so far that it collapsed under its own weight. And as if reading her thoughts, he did exactly that. Furthermore, Varric said, I have evidence that King Calethorn Raverin has been embezzling from his own territories to fund this conspiracy. That the corruption he claims to have discovered in Thornfell actually originates from his own treasury. That this entire summit appearance is a desperate attempt to deflect attention from his own crimes. There it was, the overreach. Because now he wasn't just attacking Seraphine, he was attacking Calethorn's credibility on charges that could be easily disproven with independent audits of Revoran's finances. Calethorn stood slowly, his power rolling out in a wave that made half the amphitheater tense. The Chancellor stepped forward quickly. King Reverin, protocol demands. Protocol. Protocol can burn, Calethorn said quietly. The Alpha King just accused me of treason and financial fraud in front of the entire empire. I'm invoking my right to immediate response. The Chancellor looked pained, but nodded. Procedures existed for exactly this kind of accusation. By the rules of the summit, Calethorn had the floor. Your Majesty, Calethorn said, addressing Varric directly. You stand before this assembly and claim I've been embezzling from my own territories, that I fabricated evidence of your corruption, that I somehow convinced your fated mate to betray you through dark magic and conspiracy. That is correct. Then explain this. Calethorn gestured to Lady Ashira, who stood and produced her own folder. Imperial Treasury records obtained through legal channels, showing systematic withdrawal of funds over the past 4 years. Funds that appear in your documentation as mining profits, but actually represent wealth stolen from allied territories. Fabricated, Varric said immediately. Verified by 3 independent accounting firms, Lady Ashira countered, all of whom are present at this summit and willing to testify. She named them. All 3 were Eastern Territory financial experts with reputations for brutal honesty. One of them stood from the gallery, clearly not expecting to be called out, but unable to deny their involvement. We verified the calculations, the accountant said reluctantly. The discrepancies are real. Someone has been moving Imperial funds through false mining reports. The amphitheater erupted again. This time the chaos had a different flavor. Not shocked defense of the Alpha King, but genuine confusion and the first seeds of doubt. Varric's expression didn't change, but Seraphine saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. He'd expected accusations. He hadn't expected them to have independent verification this fast. More fabrications, Varric said. Clearly my enemies have spent considerable resources building this false narrative. Your enemies? Calethorn's smile was cold. You mean the 3 accounting firms you personally approved for Imperial audits? The ones who've been verifying your treasury reports for years? They're suddenly my co-conspirators? Silence. Because that accusation stretched credibility past the breaking point. And then Seraphine stood. Every eye in the amphitheater turned to her. The discarded mate, the accused spy, the wolf who'd survived rejection and showed up wearing a crown anyway. Your Majesty, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the space. You claim our bond was fraudulent, that I never loved you, that everything was a deception designed by King Calethorn to infiltrate Thornfell. Varric's eyes narrowed. That is what the evidence shows. Then you won't mind if I share what the bond actually felt like. Seraphine stepped into the center aisle, moving toward the podium. Since it was supposedly fake, There's no sacred privacy to protect, no intimate connection to violate by speaking publicly about what we shared. She saw him realize the trap a second too late. The bond was real, Seraphine said to the assembly. I felt it the moment we met. Overwhelming, inescapable, the kind of connection that's supposed to be destiny. And King Varric felt it too. I know because he told me. Privately, repeatedly. Used it to justify decisions that consolidated his power while keeping me isolated from potential allies. Lies, Varric said, but his voice lacked certainty. Is it? Seraphine looked at him directly. Then explain why you bothered with the public rejection ceremony. If you truly believed I was a spy, you could have had me quietly arrested and interrogated. Instead, you made it a spectacle. Destroyed me in front of 300 witnesses. That's not how you handle espionage. That's how you handle losing control of something you thought you owned. The observation landed like a physical blow. Because it was true. Everyone in this room understood power and possession. Varric's public rejection had never made sense as a security measure, but as the action of an alpha who'd decided his fated mate was politically inconvenient, that tracked perfectly. You dare... Varric started. I dare because I have nothing left to lose, Seraphine cut him off. You already destroyed the bond, already declared me worthless, already sent assassins to kill me. What exactly are you going to do now that's worse than what you've already done? The amphitheater had gone completely silent. Every ruler present understood they were witnessing something historic. The collapse of the Alpha King's carefully constructed image of absolute control. Seraphine reached the podium, standing directly across from Varric's elevated throne. You want to know what really happened? I'll tell you. I was your fated mate. I loved you despite every instinct screaming that you were dangerous. And when the bond ceremony came, you looked at me and realized that being tied to someone you couldn't completely control was a weakness you wouldn't tolerate. So you rejected me. Publicly. Viciously. Made sure everyone in the Empire knew that Varric Duskbane doesn't accept fate or destiny or anything he didn't choose for himself. And now that I've survived and become something you can't dismiss, you're rewriting history to make yourself the victim of a conspiracy instead of the architect of your own catastrophic mistake. Enough! Varric's power exploded outward, sending half the assembly to their knees. His wolf was rising, amber eyes beginning to glow with the kind of dominance that had kept him in power for decades. You will be silent, or I will... Or you'll what? Kelthorn's power rose to meet Varric's, two alphas on the verge of war in a neutral summit hall. Killer. You already tried that. Didn't work. Discredit her? Too late. Everyone here just watched her stand in front of the Empire and call you a liar to your face without flinching. He moved to stand beside Seraphine at the podium. The question now is what the rest of the Empire does about it. Do you keep supporting a king who's clearly losing control? Or do you acknowledge that maybe it's time for new leadership? Treason, Varric snarled. You're calling for my overthrow. I'm calling for accountability. Kelthorn's smile was sharp. Big difference. The Eastern rulers were in heated discussion. The Western territories looked torn between shock and vindication. Even Varric's closest allies seemed uncertain, which was a crack in the foundation that wouldn't heal easily. And then the doors at the back of the amphitheater burst open. Commander Lyris entered first, followed by 6 Reverend guards and a figure in chains. The prisoner was a woman maybe 40 years old, wearing clothing that marked her as Revaran nobility. Seraphine's blood went cold, because she recognized that woman. Lady Morgana Ashenfell, one of Kelthorn's senior advisors, someone who'd been part of their inner circle since Seraphine arrived at Revaran Keep. The spy. Lyris forced the prisoner to kneel at the center of the amphitheater. We found her attempting to flee the summit grounds. She was carrying encoded messages addressed to King Varric, containing detailed intelligence about our delegation's strategy. No? The word came out before Seraphine could stop it, because if Lyris had captured the spy, that meant they'd been feeding false information to Varric through a controlled channel, that the corruption evidence they'd just presented was verified and real, that everything was going according to plan. Except Seraphine looked at Kelthorn's face and saw nothing but genuine shock. He hadn't known either. What is this? Varric demanded. This, Lyris said coldly, is Lady Morgana Ashenfell, senior advisor to the Night Dominion, and apparently your spy inside our court for the past 3 years. 3 years, not 6 weeks. 3 years of intelligence gathering that predated Seraphine's arrival at Reverin Keep entirely. Calethorn's expression had gone cold enough to freeze steel. Start talking. Now. Lady Morgana looked at him with something like pity. I'm sorry, Your Majesty, but you have to understand, Varric promised me protection for my family. My son was going to be executed for killing one of his soldiers in self-defense. The Alpha King offered to pardon him if I provided intelligence on Revarin movements. So you sold us out, Lyris said. I saved my son, by betraying everyone else. Calethorn's voice could have cut diamonds. How much did you give him? Everything. Lady Morgana's shoulders sagged. Troop movements, financial records, political strategies. And when Seraphine arrived, Varric specifically requested updates on her training and integration into court. He wanted to know if she was becoming a real threat, or just a broken wolf playing pretend. The amphitheater was silent except for shocked breathing and the whisper of steel being drawn as guards moved to defensive positions. Seraphine felt something crack inside her chest. Not the bond. That was already destroyed. This was worse. This was the realization that even Calethorn's carefully constructed revenge plan had been compromised from the beginning. That Varric had known everything they were planning and allowed it to proceed because he already had countermeasures in place. Then why are you revealing yourself now? One of the Eastern rulers called out. If you've been spying successfully for 3 years, why confess? Because I'm done. Lady Morgana looked at Varric directly. You promised my son would be safe. But 2 days ago, your forces executed him anyway. Called it an unfortunate accident. So I don't owe you loyalty anymore. She turned to Calethorn. I'll testify to everything. Every piece of intelligence I passed. Every strategy Varric used to counter your moves. All of it. Because you're right about him. He's a tyrant who crushes anyone he can't control. And I'm finished being his weapon. The betrayal was complete. Devastating. Exactly the kind of twist that redefined everything. Except Seraphine was watching Varric's face and seeing something that didn't fit. He wasn't triumphant, wasn't gloating about having a spy that deep in Calethorn's organization. He looked furious, like this confession wasn't part of his plan either. And then she understood. Lady Morgana hadn't been working for Varric exclusively. She'd been playing both sides, feeding real intelligence to the Alpha King while simultaneously positioning herself to betray him at the perfect moment for maximum damage. This wasn't Calethorn's spy getting caught. This was someone else's endgame activating. Who sent you? Seraphine asked quietly. Lady Morgana's smile was cold. No one sent me. I'm simply tired of watching powerful men destroy everything around them while pretending it's strength. So I gathered evidence on both of you. Varric's corruption, Calethorn's obsession with revenge, all the ugly truth neither of you wanted exposed. Her eyes swept the amphitheater. And now the Empire gets to see exactly what kind of rulers you really are. Both of you. She pulled something from her pocket before the guards could stop her. A vial. Drank it in one swallow. Poison, Lyris realized too late. Lady Morgana collapsed, blood already foaming at her lips. But she was smiling, because she'd just detonated a bomb that would destroy both kings simultaneously. Her final words were barely audible. No more tyrants, no more empires built on fear. Then she died. The amphitheater erupted into complete chaos. Rulers shouting accusations, guards drawing weapons, delegations scrambling for exits or defensive positions. And Seraphine stood at the podium watching everything collapse, understanding with perfect clarity that they'd just lost. Because Lady Morgana was right. The Empire was watching two alphas destroy each other over revenge and power, while innocent wolves died in the crossfire. And no amount of evidence about corruption or justified grievances would change the fact that this entire spectacle proved both rulers were too obsessed with their personal war to actually lead. Calethorn grabbed her arm. We need to leave. Now. No, Seraphine pulled free. If we run, we lose everything. We've already lost. His voice was harsh. That confession just destroyed both our credibilities. Varric's corrupted, and I've been conducting a personal vendetta for 3 years. The Empire won't support either of us. Then we give them another option. The words came out before she'd fully formed the thought. But as soon as she said them, Seraphine knew it was the only play left. She turned to face the chaos, raised her voice to carry across the amphitheater. Enough! The word cracked like a whip, backed by every ounce of authority she'd learned to project over the past 6 weeks. The crowd didn't silence immediately, but the volume dropped enough for her to be heard. "You want to know what this is really about?" Seraphine asked the assembly. "Not Varric's corruption, not Calethorn's revenge. This is about an empire that's been rotting from the inside because we've all decided that strength means domination and leadership means crushing anyone who challenges you." She pointed at Varric. "He rejected his fated mate because accepting destiny was weakness. Killed wolves who refused to submit, built an empire on fear and called it order." Then she gestured to Calethorn. "And he spent 6 years planning revenge for his sister's murder instead of building something better than what killed her. Used me as a weapon because that's all he knows how to do." Calethorn's expression went cold, but he didn't interrupt. "Both of them are trapped in the same cycle," Seraphine continued. "Destroy or be destroyed. Control or be controlled. And as long as the Empire keeps supporting rulers who think like that, nothing changes. We'll just replace one tyrant with another." "So what's your solution?" Lord Corrigan called from the eastern section. "Tear down the whole system? Maybe." Seraphine looked at him directly. "Or maybe we start by actually holding our leaders accountable. Independent audits of all imperial treasuries. Term limits on territorial rule. A council system where no single alpha can make decisions that affect the entire empire." "You're calling for revolution," someone shouted. "I'm calling for evolution. We either grow past this brutal hierarchy, or we keep repeating the same pattern until the empire tears itself apart." The amphitheater had gone quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. Thoughtful instead of shocked. And that's when Varric made his move. He launched himself from the throne in a blur of speed and violence, shifting mid-leap into full wolf form. 7 feet of apex predator aiming directly at Seraphine with claws extended and jaws open wide enough to crush her skull. Calethorn intercepted him a heartbeat before impact, his own shift completing fast enough that they collided in midair as 2 massive alpha wolves intent on murder. The fight was brutal, savage, everything Seraphine had been trained to expect from territorial combat between equals. They tore through the amphitheater like twin storms of fur and rage and blood, destroying anything that got in their path. Guards tried to intervene. Both wolves sent them flying with contemptuous ease. The rulers scattered, some fleeing for exits, while others formed protective circles around their delegations. And Seraphine stood at the podium watching the 2 kings who'd shaped her transformation try to kill each other, understanding that this was the point of no return. Because whoever won this fight would claim dominance over the empire, would prove that strength still mattered more than accountability or justice or any of the changes she'd just proposed, unless she stopped them both. The decision formed in less than a second. Seraphine shifted for the first time since the rejection, her wolf finally answering after 6 weeks of silence. The transformation hurt like fire and broken glass, but she pushed through it, let the pain clarify into purpose. Then she launched herself between the 2 fighting alphas with a roar that shook the amphitheater foundations. Both wolves turned on her immediately, territorial instinct demanding they eliminate the threat before continuing their own battle. Seraphine braced for impact, knowing this was probably suicide, but unable to see any other path forward that didn't end with the Empire burning and everything she'd survived becoming meaningless. The moment stretched, 2 alpha wolves mid-strike, her standing between them, the entire Empire watching to see if she'd survive the next 5 seconds. And then Calethorn's wolf checked his attack at the last possible instant, twisting away from her throat with a violence that spoke to how close he'd come to actually killing her. Varric didn't check. His jaws closed around her shoulder, teeth sinking deep enough to scrape bone. Pain exploded through her entire body, but she held position, locked eyes with the wolf who'd once been her fated mate. "End this," she thought at him through the ghost of the shattered bond, "or become exactly what your sister died fighting against." For a heartbeat, nothing changed. Then Varric's eyes cleared, intelligence reasserting itself over instinct, and he released her shoulder and backed away. Both wolves shifted back to human form, leaving 3 blood-covered wolves standing in the center of a destroyed amphitheater while the Empire watched in stunned silence. Calethorn reached for Seraphine, but she stepped away, her wounded shoulder screaming protest. "This ends now, both of you. No more personal war, no more using me or anyone else as weapons in your power games." She addressed the assembly, her voice raw but carrying. "The Empire gets to choose. You can support rulers who destroy each other over grudges and territory. Or you can demand better, demand accountability. Demand leaders who build instead of burn. Her vision was starting to tunnel from blood loss, but she kept talking. I survived rejection, survived bond severance, survived assassination and betrayal, and watching two kings turned me into a symbol of everything broken about this system, and I'm done being anyone's weapon. She looked at Kael'thorn. I'm done being your revenge. Then at Varric. And I'm done being your mistake. Finally back to the assembled rulers. Choose better, or watch the Empire tear itself apart while you argue about who's stronger. Then her legs gave out and she collapsed. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was both kings reaching for her at the same time, their faces showing an emotion she couldn't name but recognized anyway. Regret for creating a wolf who no longer needed either of them to survive. Seraphine woke to the smell of antiseptic and blood, her shoulder wrapped so tight she could barely move without the bandages pulling. The room was small, utilitarian, probably one of the medical suites attached to Crystalline Hall for exactly this kind of summit disaster. Sunlight filtered through narrow windows, suggesting she'd been unconscious for hours. Someone sat in the chair beside her bed. Not Kael'thorn, not a healer. Varric. Her body went rigid, every instinct screaming danger despite the fog of pain medication dulling her reflexes. The Alpha King looked like he'd been through his own war, bruises darkening his jaw where Kael'thorn's claws had connected. His ceremonial armor replaced by simple travel clothes that made him look almost human. Relax, he said quietly. I'm not here to finish what I started. Then why are you here? Because you collapsed in front of the entire Empire after telling both me and Ravarin that we were failures as leaders. Seemed worth checking if you survived. His voice carried none of the cold dominance from the courtyard or the amphitheater, just exhaustion and something that might have been regret if she didn't know better. Seraphine tried to sit up, bit back a scream as her shoulder protested, and settled for glaring at him from her current position. Where's Kael'thorn? Outside. With about 30 guards making sure I don't try to kill you again. Varric's smile was bitter. Turns out attacking your former fated mate in front of the Imperial Council damages your credibility. Who knew? You tried to rip my throat out. I tried to end a threat before it destroyed everything I'd built. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. Difference is, I failed. You're still alive. Still dangerous. And now the entire Empire is questioning whether I'm fit to lead. Good. The word came out harder than intended, but Seraphine didn't take it back. She'd spent 6 weeks transforming herself into someone who could stand against this man, and she wasn't about to apologize for succeeding. You were always stronger than I gave you credit for, Varric said. I see that now. Too late, obviously, but I see it. Is this supposed to be an apology? No. This is me trying to understand what the hell just happened. He gestured vaguely toward the door, meaning the amphitheater beyond. You stood between two Alpha Kings mid-combat and survived. That's not training. That's not luck. That's something else entirely. That's what happens when you stop caring about survival and start caring about what you're surviving for. Seraphine met his eyes directly. You taught me that. When you destroyed our bond, you took away the one thing I thought defined me. Turned out it was the best thing you could have done, because it freed you to become Ravarin's weapon. Because it freed me to become my own person. She sat up despite the pain, refused to have this conversation lying down. Kael'thorn gave me tools and training, but the choice to use them was mine. The choice to stand in that amphitheater and call out both of you was mine. And the choice to survive what comes next will be mine too. Varric studied her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his amber eyes. When I rejected you, I told myself it was strategic, that the Empire needed strength, not sentiment, that being tied to a wolf with no political value would make me vulnerable. You weren't wrong. Seraphine's voice was cold. I had no value, no territory, no alliances, nothing that justified standing beside the Alpha King, except the bond. Varric's hands clenched, except the one thing that's supposed to matter more than politics or strategy or empire building. And I threw it away because I was terrified of caring about something I couldn't control. Now you're trying to make this about feelings. I'm trying to explain that I made a mistake. The words came out rough, like they cost him something. I looked at you standing in that ceremonial gown, and I felt the bond pulling me towards something that wasn't conquest or dominance or power. I felt vulnerable, and I couldn't tolerate that, so I destroyed it. His jaw tightened. But watching you stand in that amphitheater, seeing what you became without me, I realized the mistake wasn't rejecting you. It was thinking strength meant eliminating anything that made me feel weak. You weren't the weakness. My fear was. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and dangerous and completely useless. That's a lovely epiphany, Seraphine said. Doesn't change what you did, doesn't undo the bond severance or the assassins, or standing in front of 300 wolves and declaring me worthless. You don't get to have regrets now that I'm no longer broken. I know. Varric stood, moved toward the window. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking what happens next. What do you mean? The Empire is fracturing. Half the Eastern territories are calling for my abdication. The Western rulers want Calethorn investigated for conducting a personal vendetta using Imperial resources, and you're the only wolf both sides seem willing to listen to because you told the truth when everyone else was lying. So the Empire needs leadership that isn't two alphas trying to destroy each other. Varric turned to face her. The Council is proposing a transitional government, multiple rulers sharing power until we can rebuild the political structure. And they want you on it. Absolutely not. You don't have a choice. The Eastern Territories won't accept governance without representation from someone who stood against corruption. The Western Territories won't cooperate unless Ravarin has a voice. You're the only person who bridges both. Seraphine's head was spinning, and not just from blood loss. I'm not qualified to govern anything. I've been a queen for 6 weeks. Most of that was combat training and learning how to not get killed in political negotiations. You're qualified because you survived. Varric's expression was serious. Because when 2 kings were using you as a weapon, you took control of the narrative and forced everyone to see the truth. That's leadership. Messy, desperate, absolutely terrifying leadership, but it's more real than anything I've done in a decade. Before Seraphine could respond, the door opened and Calethorn entered with Commander Lyris close behind. His eyes went immediately to Varric, his power rising in a wave of territorial aggression that made the windows rattle. Get away from her, Calethorn said quietly. I'm leaving. Varric headed for the door but paused beside Calethorn. For what it's worth, you were right. About the corruption. About me losing control. About everything. Calethorn's expression didn't soften. My sister is still dead. Your regrets don't bring her back. No. But maybe preventing the next sister from dying counts for something. Varric left without waiting for a response, leaving Seraphine alone with Calethorn and the weight of too many revelations. What did he want? Calethorn demanded. To warn me that the Empire wants me involved in rebuilding the government. Seraphine pushed herself fully upright despite Lyris's disapproving look. Apparently being the only wolf willing to call out both of you makes me qualified for leadership. That's insane. That's politics. She met his eyes. What happened after I collapsed? The Empire lost its mind. Calethorn moved to the window Varric had just vacated. 3 delegations walked out immediately. 5 more are threatening to secede from Imperial authority entirely. The Eastern Territories are demanding Varric's immediate abdication. The Western rulers want me investigated for abuse of power. And everyone is pointing at you as proof that the entire system is broken. Because I am proof. Seraphine swung her legs off the bed, testing whether standing was possible. I survived things that should have killed me because the system is designed to crush anyone who challenges it. The fact that I'm still breathing means something's deeply wrong with how we govern, or it means you're exceptional. It means I got lucky. Lucky that you found me in that courtyard. Lucky that your need for revenge aligned with my survival. Lucky that when I stood between 2 alphas mid-combat, you both checked your strikes instead of killing me. I didn't check my strike, Calethorn said quietly. I pulled back because killing you would have made me exactly what Varric is. A wolf who destroys anything that threatens his control. The admission hit harder than expected, because it meant somewhere in the past 6 weeks she'd stopped being a weapon to him and become something he actively chose not to harm. What do you want? She asked. Not from the Empire. From me. What do you actually want? Calethorn turned from the window, storm-gray eyes showing something she'd never seen before. Uncertainty. I wanted revenge, wanted to watch Varric's empire collapse as payment for Alara's death. And I got that. The Eastern Territories are abandoning him. His corruption is exposed. His credibility is destroyed. But it feels hollow. He crossed the room until he was standing directly in front of her. Because the woman who made it possible is looking at me like I'm just another king who used her for political gain. And maybe that's exactly what I am, but somewhere between the training yard and the summit, it stopped being just strategy. What are you saying? I'm saying that if the empire fractures and you walk away from all of this, I want you to know it wasn't just about revenge. Calethorn's hand came up, fingers brushing her uninjured shoulder. You reminded me why Alara fought so hard to change things, why she believed wolves could be better than what the empire made them. And I don't want to lose that. You don't get to keep me, Seraphine said. I'm not a weapon or a symbol or proof of your sister's ideals. I'm just a wolf trying to survive in a system designed to crush people like me. I know. That's why I'm not asking you to stay. I'm asking what you need, from me, from the empire, from whatever comes next. The question was genuine, which made it infinitely more dangerous than any political maneuvering. I need you to let me choose, Seraphine said finally, not manipulate, not strategize. Just let me decide what role I want in rebuilding this empire without pressure from you or Varric or anyone else trying to use me as leverage. Calethorn nodded slowly. Done. You want to walk away completely? I'll make sure no one stops you. You want to help rebuild? I'll support whatever structure you think works best. Your choice. No strings. Why? Because you were right in that amphitheater. I spent 6 years planning revenge instead of building something better. And if I keep trying to control outcomes, I'm just repeating the same pattern that got Alara killed. He stepped back, giving her space. So whatever you decide, I'll respect it, even if it means watching you choose a path that doesn't include me. The offer was genuine, terrifying, exactly what she'd demanded, but somehow more complicated now that he'd actually agreed. I need time, Seraphine said, to think, to heal, to figure out who I am when I'm not fighting for survival every second. Take all the time you need. Calethorn headed for the door, paused with his hand on the frame. For what it's worth, I think you already know who you are. You're the wolf who survived rejection, bond severance, and 2 alpha kings trying to use you as a weapon. That's not someone who needs time to figure herself out. That's someone who's already become exactly what she was always meant to be. He left before she could respond, leaving Seraphine alone with Lyris and the uncomfortable realization that both kings had just offered her the same thing in different words, freedom to choose her own path, which was infinitely more dangerous than being told what to do. The Imperial Council convened 3 days later in Crystalline Hall's main chamber, this time with considerably more security and significantly less optimism. Representatives from every major territory filled the space, their delegations sized according to political influence and military strength. The atmosphere tasted like gunpowder and failed negotiations. Seraphine entered wearing the same green leather and silk from the disastrous opening ceremony, her wounded shoulder still bandaged beneath the fabric but mobile enough to function. Calethorn walked on her right, Varric on her left, the 3 of them forming a triangle of complicated history and uneasy truce. The assembled rulers watched them approach the central platform with expressions ranging from shock to calculation. No one had expected to see all 3 standing together. The council chancellor, still looking like he'd aged a decade in the past week, called the session to order with a voice that suggested he was done with everyone's drama and ready to retire. "We are here to address the crisis facing the Empire," he said. "The events of the opening ceremony have exposed corruption, betrayal, and a fundamental breakdown in imperial governance. Multiple territories are threatening secession. Alliance structures have collapsed, and trust in central authority is at an all-time low." He gestured to the platform where Seraphine stood between the 2 kings. "These 3 wolves represent the core of our current crisis. And paradoxically, they may also represent our best path forward. The floor is yours." Seraphine stepped forward before either king could speak. "Honored rulers and delegates, I'm not going to waste time with diplomatic language or political theater. You all saw what happened in the amphitheater. You know the empire is broken. The question is whether we fix it or watch it burn." Several rulers shifted uncomfortably. Direct confrontation wasn't standard council protocol. "The current system concentrates too much power in too few hands," Seraphine continued. "It allows rulers like King Varric to operate without oversight until corruption becomes systematic. It enables wolves like King Calethorn to conduct personal vendettas using imperial resources. And it crushes anyone who challenges the hierarchy, which means the Empire never evolves past its worst impulses. So what's your proposal? Lord Corrigan asked. Tear down the monarchy entirely? Not tear down, transform. Seraphine had spent the past 3 days working with Lady Ashira on this proposal, gaming out every angle. I'm suggesting a transitional council structure. 5 rulers from different territories, elected by their peers, serving limited terms with full financial transparency and oversight committees. That's radical, someone called from the Western delegation. That's necessary. Calethorn spoke for the first time, his voice carrying authority. The current system failed. Spectacularly. We either adapt or we collapse into civil war. The Transitional Council gives us time to rebuild trust while preventing any single ruler from consolidating too much power. And who sits on this council? An Eastern Territory representative demanded. You're essentially asking us to trust the same wolves who just tore the Empire apart. No. Seraphine locked eyes with the speaker. We're asking you to choose new leadership. Independent rulers who weren't involved in the recent conflicts. Wolves with proven track records of ethical governance and territorial stability. She took a breath. King Varric and King Calethorn have both agreed to step back from active leadership during the transition. They'll serve as advisors without voting authority. I will coordinate between council members but hold no executive power myself. The chamber exploded into debate. Half the delegates thought the proposal was too radical. The other half thought it didn't go far enough. Several rulers demanded immediate elections. Others wanted military oversight. A few called for complete dissolution of imperial authority. Seraphine let them argue for 10 minutes, then raised her voice to cut through the chaos. Here's what happens if we don't act. The Eastern Territories secede within the month. The Western kingdoms form their own alliance to counter whoever fills the power vacuum. Trade routes collapse. Border conflicts escalate into open warfare. And within a year, the Empire fractures into a dozen hostile territories fighting over resources and territory. She let that sink in. Or we take 3 months. Build the Transitional Council. Implement financial oversight. Give territories real autonomy while maintaining enough central authority to prevent chaos. It's not perfect, but it's better than civil war. And if the Transitional Council fails, Varric asked quietly, if we implement this structure and it collapses into the same corruption and power struggles, then we failed, Seraphine said bluntly. But at least we tried something different instead of repeating the same cycle that got us here. At least we proved that change was possible even if it didn't work perfectly. The room went silent, because that honesty was more compelling than any political promise. I'll support this proposal, Lord Corrigan said, standing. The Eastern Territories need stability more than we need revenge. If this Transitional Council can deliver that, we'll participate in good faith. One by one, other rulers stood, some reluctantly, some with obvious skepticism, but enough to form a working majority. The vote was called. The proposal passed with 70% support, which in imperial politics counted as a landslide. Seraphine felt something unlock in her chest. Not relief, not victory, just the tentative possibility that maybe survival could evolve into something resembling actual progress. The council session continued for another 6 hours, hammering out details of the transition, debating territorial boundaries, and arguing about trade agreements. Seraphine participated where necessary, but mostly let the experienced politicians handle the minutiae. By the time they adjourned for the evening, she was exhausted enough that her vision kept tunneling, and her wounded shoulder felt like someone was driving nails through the joint. Calethorn caught her on the way out of the chamber. You need to rest. You're barely standing. I'm fine. You're about 10 minutes from collapsing again. Come on. He guided her toward the medical wing, his hand on her uninjured shoulder, steady and grounding. They'd almost reached the suite when Varric stepped out of a side corridor blocking their path. We need to talk, the Alpha King said. All 3 of us. Now. This can wait, Calethorn said. No, it can't. Varric's expression was grim, because tomorrow the council starts selecting transitional members, and there's something you both need to understand before that happens. Seraphine was too tired to deal with more political maneuvering, but she nodded. Make it quick. They ended up in a small conference room off the main hall, just the 3 of them, and enough tension to crack stone. Varric closed the door, checked that it was sealed against eavesdropping, then turned to face them. The Eastern Territories are planning to nominate you for the Transitional Council, he said, looking at Seraphine. Lord Corrigan approached me earlier asking if I'd support your candidacy. He thinks you're the only wolf both sides trust enough to prevent the council from devolving into factional warfare. Absolutely not, Seraphine said immediately. I'm not qualified. I've been involved in imperial politics for exactly 6 weeks. Most of that was learning how to not die. That's exactly why they want you. Varric's smile was bitter. You're not entrenched in existing power structures. You don't owe favors to old allies or have grudges against traditional enemies. You're a blank slate that both sides can project their hopes onto. That's insane. That's politics. Kelthorn leaned against the wall. And for what it's worth, I think you'd be effective. You've already proven you can stand against pressure that would break most wolves. And you understand the cost of corruption because you survived being crushed by it. I don't want power, Seraphine said. I want to survive and figure out who I am when I'm not fighting for my life every second. Sometimes those goals overlap. Varric moved closer. The Transitional Council needs someone who remembers what the Empire looks like from the bottom. Someone who understands that strength isn't about domination. You keep saying the system needs to change. This is your chance to actually change it by becoming part of the same power structure that tried to destroy me, by transforming it from the inside. Kelthorn's expression was serious. You've already done the hard part. You survived. You stood in front of the Empire and forced them to see the truth. Now you get to help build something better from the wreckage. Seraphine looked between them, these two alpha kings who'd shaped her transformation in such different ways, and felt the weight of impossible choice pressing down. What do you both get out of this? She asked quietly. Why are you pushing me toward a position that would give me power over both of you? Because I owe you, Varric said simply. I destroyed your bond, sent assassins to kill you, and tried to rip your throat out in front of the entire Empire. Supporting your candidacy doesn't make us even, but it's a start. And because you're the best option, Kelthorn added, I could manipulate the selection process, could ensure someone loyal to Revarin gets the seat, but that just perpetuates the same power games that destroyed the Empire. You're different. You'd actually try to do the right thing instead of the strategic thing. The honesty was disarming, dangerous. Exactly the kind of trust that could get her killed or elevated into a position she had no business occupying. I need to think, Seraphine said. You have until tomorrow morning. Varric headed for the door. The nominations open at dawn. After that, the decision is out of your hands. He left, leaving Seraphine alone with Kelthorn and the weight of potential futures she hadn't asked for. You don't have to do this, Kelthorn said quietly. If you want to walk away, I meant what I said. I'll support whatever you choose. What would Alara do? The question clearly caught him off guard. He was silent for a long moment, thinking. She'd probably jump at the chance. Alara believed she could fix anything if she just worked hard enough and refused to accept defeat. It got her killed, but it also inspired everyone who knew her to try harder. And what do you believe? I believe you're stronger than my sister, smarter, more willing to accept that some systems are too broken to save. Kelthorn's hand found hers, squeezed gently. So whatever you choose, it'll be the right decision, even if it terrifies you. Everything terrifies me, Seraphine admitted. I'm terrified of failing, terrified of succeeding and becoming just another ruler who loses herself to power, terrified of walking away and watching the Empire collapse because I was too scared to try, then flip a coin. What? Kelthorn's smile was sad. That's what Alara used to do when she couldn't decide. She'd flip a coin and then pay attention to which outcome she was hoping for while it was in the air, made the actual decision obvious. That's terrible strategy. That's being human. He released her hand. Get some rest. Tomorrow the Empire finds out if they're getting a revolutionary or if you're walking away to live a quiet life somewhere. The politics can't touch you. He left before she could respond, leaving her alone in the conference room with too many thoughts and not nearly enough certainty. Seraphine stood there for a long time, testing different futures in her mind. Walking away, accepting the nomination, finding some middle path that satisfied no one but kept her alive. In the end, the decision wasn't about strategy or politics or what the Empire needed. It was about the girl who'd stood in a rain-soaked courtyard waiting to die, and what she would have wanted for the wolf who survived. Dishi Woosh Dink. The nomination session opened at dawn in a smaller chamber designed for formal proceedings. 20 representatives from across the empire, each with authority to propose candidates for the transitional council. Seraphine entered wearing simple clothing, her wounded shoulder still bandaged but functional. She'd made her decision sometime around 3 in the morning, sitting alone in her suite watching the sun rise over mountains that didn't care about empires or politics, or wolves trying to survive impossible situations. Lord Corrigan stood immediately. I nominate Seraphine Vale for the Eastern Territory seat on the Transitional Council. Her actions during the crisis demonstrated integrity, courage, and a commitment to transparency that this empire desperately needs. The nomination hung in the air like a blade. I second the nomination, Lady Ashira said from the Western delegation. The Night Dominion recognizes her qualifications and supports her candidacy. More voices joined, some enthusiastic, some strategic, all of them pushing her toward a future she'd never imagined 6 weeks ago standing broken in Thornfell's courtyard. The Chancellor looked at Seraphine. Do you accept the nomination? This was the moment, the point where she either stepped into the role they'd created for her or walked away completely. Seraphine thought about Varric's regret and Kelthorn's trust, and Alara's belief that wolves could be better than what the Empire made them. She thought about Lady Morgana dying from poison, her final words a condemnation of rulers who destroyed everything while calling it strength. She thought about the girl in the rain, broken and bleeding and absolutely certain she was going to die alone. And then she thought about the wolf who survived all of that and stood between 2 Alpha Kings to force the Empire to see its own corruption. I accept, Seraphine said, on the condition that the Council implements full financial transparency within the first month, establishes independent oversight committees with real authority, and commits to term limits that prevent any ruler from consolidating permanent power. The chamber erupted into debate about the conditions, but Seraphine barely heard it, because she'd just committed to staying in the empire that had tried to destroy her, committing to helping rebuild the system that had crushed her. It was possibly the stupidest decision she'd ever made, or possibly the bravest. The vote was called. Her nomination passed with 85% support. Seraphine Vale, formerly of Thornfell, rejected mate of the Alpha King, became the youngest wolf ever appointed to imperial governance. The session continued, selecting 4 more council members from territories across the empire, each one carefully balanced to prevent any single faction from dominating, each one watched by an assembly that was still deciding whether this experiment would save them or accelerate their collapse. By noon, the transitional council was complete. 5 rulers from different territories, all committed to 3 months of intensive reform before elections determined permanent governance. Seraphine stood with the other council members as the Chancellor administered the formal oath, swearing to serve the Empire's best interests above personal gain or factional loyalty. The words felt simultaneously meaningful and hollow, like promising to fix something that might be too broken to save. But she'd survived worse than broken promises. The ceremony concluded. The council members dispersed to begin the actual work of governance, and Seraphine found herself standing alone in the now empty chamber, looking at the seat she'd just sworn to occupy. Kelthorn appeared from a side entrance. How does it feel? Terrifying. She turned to face him. I have no idea what I'm doing. Good. That means you'll ask questions instead of assuming you know everything. He moved closer. The Empire needs leaders who admit uncertainty. What happens now? Now you prove Varric was wrong about you being worthless. Prove I was right about you being exceptional, and hopefully prevent civil war while you're at it. His smile was sharp. No pressure. Seraphine laughed despite everything. You're terrible at motivational speeches. I'm aware. But I'm excellent at strategy and political maneuvering, which you're going to need over the next 3 months. So if you want help, I'm available. As an advisor? As whatever you need. Kelthorn's expression softened. I meant what I said. This isn't about using you anymore. This is about watching someone I care about try to save an empire that tried to kill her. And if I can help with that, I will. The offer was genuine, complicated, exactly the kind of partnership that could either save them or destroy what they'd built. I'll think about it, Seraphine said. Fair enough. He headed for the door, paused at the threshold. For what it's worth, Alara would have loved you. You have the same stubborn refusal to accept that some things can't be fixed. Is that a compliment? From me? Absolutely. He disappeared into the corridor, leaving her alone with the weight of her new responsibilities. Seraphine stood in the empty chamber for another long moment, then headed toward the council offices to begin the work of actually governing. The next 3 months would determine whether the empire survived or fractured into chaos, whether her survival had meaning beyond just existing, whether wolves like her and Alara could actually change a system designed to crush them. She had no idea if any of it would work. But standing there in Crystalline Hall, wounded shoulder aching and heart still carrying the ghost of a shattered bond, Seraphine Vale decided that trying was worth more than surviving. And if trying got her killed, at least she'd die fighting for something that mattered instead of broken in a courtyard waiting for mercy that never came. The war came on the 7th day of the Transitional Council's governance. Seraphine was in her office reviewing trade agreements when Commander Lyris burst through the door without knocking, her expression grim enough to stop Seraphine's heart. "We have a problem. Hostile forces just crossed the northern border. 3 battalions. Full combat deployment. They're heading straight for the council headquarters." "Who?" Seraphine was already moving, grabbing weapons from the rack beside her desk. "Which territory?" "None of them." Lyris's voice was flat. "The banners are Thornfell, Varric's personal guard, and they're not responding to communication attempts." The world tilted. Because Varric had sworn to support the transitional government, had stood in the council chamber and pledged to step back from active leadership. Either he'd lied, or someone was using his forces without authorization. "Where is he?" Seraphine demanded. "No one knows." "He left the summit grounds 3 days ago. Said he was returning to Thornfell to oversee the transfer of authority. We haven't heard from him since." Seraphine's mind raced through scenarios, each one worse than the last. A coup attempt. A rogue commander acting without orders. Varric himself breaking his oath and trying to seize control before the Transitional Council could solidify power. Get Kalethorn. Get the other council members. Full defensive positions around the headquarters. And find out who's leading those battalions. Lyris was gone before she finished speaking, leaving Seraphine alone with the terrible understanding that 7 days of tentative peace had just shattered. The Empire was going to war, and she was standing directly in the path of whatever came next. The hostile battalions reached the outer perimeter of Crystalline Hall at dusk, 3 full companies of Thornfell's elite guard moving with the disciplined precision of wolves trained for siege warfare. Seraphine watched their approach from the reinforced command center, her wounded shoulder throbbing in rhythm with her pulse as she tried to make sense of what was happening. Kalethorn stood beside her, studying tactical displays, his expression carved from stone and controlled fury. "They're not attacking yet, just establishing position. Whoever's commanding them wants us to know we're surrounded before they make their move." "Can we break through?" Seraphine asked. "With heavy casualties on both sides, yes." Commander Torin moved markers across the tactical map. "But if we engage, we're starting a civil war that'll fracture the Empire before the Transitional Council has a chance to stabilize anything. So we're trapped. We're cornered." Kalethorn's correction was subtle, but important. Trapped implies no options. Cornered just means the options are all terrible. The other council members had assembled in the command center, their faces showing varying degrees of panic and calculation. Lord Corrigan looked like he wanted to negotiate. Lady Ashira was already planning defensive positions. The Western Territory representative, a wolf named Marcus Ironpeak, was calling for immediate military response. "We need to identify who's commanding those forces," Seraphine said. "If it's Varric acting without council authority, that's a direct violation of his oath. If it's someone else using his banners, that's an even bigger problem." "Does it matter?" Marcus demanded. "Either way, we're surrounded by hostile forces. We need to fight or surrender, and I'm not surrendering to anyone. Fighting means civil war." Lord Corrigan's voice was strained. "Thousands dead. The Empire fractured beyond repair. We have to at least try diplomacy first." "Diplomacy with wolves who surrounded us without warning?" Lady Ashira's skepticism was warranted. "That's not how you open negotiations. That's how you lay siege." A young soldier burst into the command center, breathing hard. "Your Majesties, they're sending an envoy, single wolf, unarmed, requesting immediate audience with the Transitional Council." Seraphine and Kalethorn exchanged glances. An envoy meant someone wanted to talk, which was better than immediate violence, but also suggested this was calculated rather than impulsive. "Bring them in," Seraphine ordered. "Full security. If they make any threatening moves, Commander Torin has authorization to end them. The envoy who entered 5 minutes later was the last person Seraphine expected to see. Corwin, the elderly physician who'd served Varric for 40 years, who'd stepped forward in that rain-soaked courtyard trying to get Seraphine medical treatment while she was dying from bond severance. The old wolf looked exhausted, his weathered face carved with new lines of stress and something that looked like shame. "Honored council members," he said, bowing formally, "I come bearing a message from King Varric Duskbane and a request that you hear the full truth before deciding how to respond to our presence." "Your presence looks a lot like a siege," Calethorn said coldly. "Start talking before I decide diplomacy isn't worth the effort." Corwin straightened, meeting their eyes directly. 3 days ago, King Varric returned to Thornfell to begin transferring authority as he'd sworn to do. What he found was a coup attempt already in progress. His senior commanders, believing he'd grown weak by supporting the Transitional Council, had decided to remove him from power and restore what they called proper imperial authority. The room went silent. Varric fought back, Corwin continued, tried to prevent the coup with loyal forces, but the conspirators had been planning this for weeks. They overwhelmed his personal guard, imprisoned him in the lower dungeons, and seized control of Thornfell's military. "Then whose forces are surrounding us?" Seraphine asked. "Rebels who believe the Empire needs strength, not reform. Wolves who think the Transitional Council is weakness that will destroy everything. They're using Varric's banners to give their attack legitimacy, but he's not commanding them. He's locked in a cell, barely surviving the interrogations they're putting him through, trying to force his formal abdication." The revelation hit like a physical blow, because it meant the threat outside wasn't Varric breaking his oath. It was his own commanders deciding he'd become too compromised to lead and taking matters into their own hands. "How did you escape?" Lord Corrigan asked. "I didn't escape. They sent me." Corwin's expression was bitter. The rebel commanders want the Transitional Council to know their terms, surrender authority back to Thornfell's military leadership, dissolve the council, and return to traditional imperial governance. Do that, and they'll stand down. Refuse, and they attack at dawn. "That's not negotiation," Lady Ashira said. "That's extortion. That's wolves who believe survival requires dominance, looking at your experiment in shared governance and seeing weakness they need to eliminate." Corwin looked at Seraphine directly. "They're terrified of what you represent. A wolf who survived rejection and rose to power anyway. Someone who proved the hierarchy isn't absolute. They want you dead more than anyone. So this is about me. This is about what you symbolize." Corwin's voice gentled. "You're proof that discarded wolves can become dangerous, that the Empire's brutal hierarchy can be challenged and beaten. Every wolf who's ever been crushed by someone stronger looks at you and starts wondering if they have to accept their position. That's existentially threatening to everyone whose power depends on others staying beaten." The analysis was accurate and completely unhelpful, because it meant this wasn't a conflict she could negotiate away or strategize around. This was ideological warfare between wolves who believed in transformation and wolves who needed the hierarchy to stay rigid and unbreakable. "What about Varric?" Calethorn asked. "What are they planning to do with him?" "Execute him once they secure the Transitional Council's surrender. Make it look like he died fighting rebels. Then install a new Alpha King who'll restore traditional governance." Corwin's hands clenched. "I served that man for 40 years. Watched him make terrible decisions and commit atrocities in the name of strength. But he was trying to change, trying to break the cycle that destroyed him. And his own commanders are going to kill him for it." Seraphine's mind was racing through scenarios, each one bleaker than the last. They couldn't surrender. That would validate every wolf who believed transformation was impossible. But fighting meant civil war and thousands dead. And even if they won, Varric would be executed before they could mount a rescue. There was no good option, just degrees of catastrophic failure, unless she changed the parameters entirely. "I'm going to Thornfell," Seraphine said. The command center erupted into protest. Calethorn grabbed her uninjured arm. "Absolutely not. That's suicide. It's the only play we have." She pulled free, her voice cutting through the chaos. "The rebels want me dead because I represent change. Fine. I'll give them the chance to kill me, but I'll do it on my terms, in front of their entire force, while exposing exactly what they're really fighting for." "That's insane," Marcus said. "That's strategy." Seraphine looked at Corwin. Can you get me into Thornfell? Into the same room as whoever's leading this coup? The physician's eyes widened. You want to confront them directly? I want to make them explain to their soldiers why they're willing to start a civil war, why they're so terrified of a transitional council that they'd rather slaughter thousands than risk 3 months of reform. Let their own forces hear the truth and decide if they're really willing to die for that. It might work, Lord Corrigan said slowly. If enough soldiers question the orders, the coup collapses from within. Or they kill her immediately, and the rebellion becomes about avenging imperial overreach, Calethorn countered. This is too risky. Everything's risky. Seraphine met his eyes. But this is the only option that doesn't guarantee civil war or surrender. And if I'm going to die, I'd rather it be trying to prevent bloodshed than hiding behind walls while the Empire tears itself apart. The resolve in her voice left no room for argument. She'd made this decision the same way she'd made every impossible choice over the past months, by accepting that survival without purpose was just slow death, and she was done accepting half measures. Calethorn stared at her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his storm-gray eyes. Then he turned to Corwin. Get her into Thornfell. I'm coming too. No. Seraphine's voice was iron. You stay here and coordinate the defense if this goes wrong. The Council needs someone who knows how to fight. The Council needs you alive. The Council needs me to do what no one else can. She softened slightly. This is my choice, Calethorn. Not manipulation, not strategy. Just me deciding that some things are worth dying for. His jaw worked, fighting against instinct and training and every protective impulse. Finally, he nodded. If you're not back in 12 hours, I'm burning Thornfell to the ground. Fair enough. Commander Lyris stepped forward. I'm going with you. Non-negotiable. Fine. Seraphine was already moving toward the armory. Anyone else who wants to commit suicide can join us. We leave in 20 minutes. Amishsamt. The journey to Thornfell took 6 hours through hostile territory, Corwin navigating back roads and supply routes that avoided the main rebel positions. Seraphine rode in silence, her mind turning over what she'd say when facing wolves who wanted her dead for daring to survive. Lyris kept checking weapons and scanning for threats, her presence a solid reminder that Seraphine wasn't completely alone in this insanity. You know this probably won't work, the commander said quietly. Most likely outcome is they kill you immediately and use your death as propaganda. I know, and you're doing it anyway, because the alternative is watching the Empire burn while I hide behind walls. Seraphine adjusted her weapons belt. I've spent months learning how to fight, how to survive, how to be the kind of wolf who doesn't break under pressure. This is what all that training was for. Calethorn trained you to be a queen, not a martyr. Maybe they're the same thing. When the Empire's this broken, maybe the only way to lead is by being willing to sacrifice everything for the possibility of change. Lyris was quiet for a long moment. Alara used to say things like that. Got her killed. I know, but she also inspired everyone around her to try harder, to believe transformation was possible. Sometimes the example matters more than the outcome. They reached Thornfell's outer gates as midnight approached, the palace looming against the sky like a monument to power and corruption. Corwin led them through servant passages and hidden corridors, avoiding main thoroughfares where rebel guards would have stopped them. The throne room was filled with soldiers when they finally reached it, maybe 200 wolves in full armor surrounding a makeshift command center. At the center stood 3 senior commanders Seraphine vaguely recognized from her brief time at Thornfell. Hard wolves who'd built their careers on violence and absolute loyalty to imperial strength. The leader, a massive wolf named General Thrace, looked up as they entered. His eyes went immediately to Seraphine, recognition and hatred flashing across brutal features. Well, the physician brought us a gift. Thrace's smile was all teeth. Seraphine veil, the symbol of everything wrong with the Empire, walking into our hands like fate itself wants you dead. I came to talk, Seraphine said, to understand why you're willing to destroy the Empire rather than try something different. There's nothing to understand. Thrace gestured to his soldiers. The Empire was built on strength, on clear hierarchy where the powerful lead and the weak follow. Your transitional council threatens that, makes wolves think they can challenge their betters and survive. So you'd rather start a civil war. We'd rather eliminate a cancer before it spreads. He moved closer, his power rolling out in waves designed to force submission. You should be dead. Varric should have let you bleed out in that courtyard instead of showing mercy. That weakness infected him, made him think reform was possible, made him betray everything the Empire stands for. Is that what this is about? Seraphine held her ground despite the pressure. You're not fighting the Transitional Council. You're punishing Varric for trying to change. We're correcting a mistake. Thrace's voice was cold. And you're going to help us do it. You're going to stand in front of those forces surrounding Crystalline Hall and order the Council to surrender. Tell them reform failed. Tell them the Empire needs traditional leadership. Do that, and we'll make your death quick. And if I refuse, then we kill you slowly, execute Varric publicly, and march on Crystalline Hall anyway. Either way, the Transitional Council falls. You just get to choose how much you suffer first. The threat was real, brutal, exactly what she'd expected. But Seraphine had learned something over the past months of training and transformation. Threats only worked when you feared the outcome more than you valued the principle. And she'd stopped fearing death around the same time she'd started understanding what made survival meaningful. No, she said quietly. Thrace's expression darkened. No, I won't help you destroy the Transitional Council. Won't validate your belief that strength requires crushing everyone who challenges you. And I definitely won't tell your soldiers that reform failed when we haven't even tried it yet. She raised her voice, addressing the assembled wolves. You want to know what's really happening here? General Thrace is terrified. Terrified that if the Transitional Council succeeds, wolves won't need commanders who rule through fear. Terrified that shared governance might actually work better than absolute hierarchy. Terrified that his entire career has been built on a lie that strength requires domination. Silence, Thrace snarled. Why? Because you don't want your soldiers hearing this? Don't want them questioning whether starting a civil war is really about protecting the Empire or protecting your power. She turned to face the assembled forces directly. I was rejected by King Varric in front of the entire imperial court, stood in the rain dying from bond severance while nobles laughed. I should be dead, but I survived. And over the past months, I learned that real strength isn't about crushing opposition. It's about building something strong enough that it doesn't need to crush people to survive. That's weakness, Thrace spat. Is it? Then why are you so scared of 3 months of reform? Why surround Crystalline Hall with 3 battalions if the Transitional Council is so weak it'll collapse on its own? You're not acting like someone confident in their position. You're acting like someone desperate to stop change before it proves you obsolete. Several soldiers shifted, their expressions uncertain, the seed of doubt taking root. Thrace saw it too. His power exploded outward in a wave of dominance that sent half the room to their knees. Enough. You'll die for this defiance, and we'll make sure every wolf in the Empire knows what happens to those who challenge proper authority. He shifted mid-sentence, his wolf form massive and scarred from decades of combat, lunged towards Seraphine with claws extended and jaws open. Lyris moved to intercept, but Seraphine stopped her with a gesture, shifted into her own wolf form, and met Thrace's attack head-on. The fight was brutal. Thrace had 50 years of combat experience and a body built for violence. Seraphine had 6 weeks of intensive training and the absolute certainty that dying here meant something more than surviving by surrendering. She lost. Obviously. Within 30 seconds, Thrace had her pinned, his jaws around her throat, victory absolute. But she'd made her point. Shown the assembled soldiers that she'd rather die fighting than submit to wolves who thought strength required crushing opposition. Thrace's teeth tightened, preparing to end it. And that's when the throne room doors exploded inward. Varric entered in full alpha form, his massive wolf bleeding from a dozen wounds but moving with lethal purpose. Behind him came soldiers bearing Thornfell's true royal guard colors, wolves loyal to their king rather than rebellious commanders. The coup leaders tried to rally, but Varric tore through them like they were made of paper. Not mindless violence, surgical strikes aimed at wolves who'd betrayed their oaths and imprisoned their king. Thrace released Seraphine and turned to face the greater threat. The 2 massive wolves collided in the center of the throne room, the impact shattering stone and sending soldiers scrambling. Seraphine shifted back to human form, her throat bleeding but intact. watched as Varric fought with the kind of controlled fury that spoke to personal betrayal on top of strategic necessity. The battle was over in minutes. Thrace went down hard. Varric's jaws locked around his throat in the kill position. The remaining rebel commanders surrendered, rather than die for a coup that had already failed. Silence fell across the throne room, broken only by harsh breathing and the whimpers of wounded soldiers. Varric shifted back to human form, standing over Thrace's body with blood covering his skin and exhaustion weighing down every movement. When he finally looked at Seraphine, his amber eyes showed something between gratitude and disbelief. "You came here," he said, "walked into hostile territory knowing they wanted you dead. Why?" "Because someone had to prove that transformation was worth fighting for." Seraphine's throat hurt, from where Thrace's teeth had compressed her windpipe. "And because you were in trouble. Seemed like the least I could do after you saved my life in that courtyard." "I didn't save your life." Varric moved closer, his expression raw. "Kael'thorn did. I was ready to let you die. And yet here you are, preventing a coup rather than letting your commanders restore traditional governance." She met his eyes. "People change, Varric. Even Alpha Kings who thought strength required eliminating weakness. That's the whole point of the Transitional Council, giving everyone a chance to be better than what the Empire made them." He stared at her for a long moment, then slowly knelt. "Not in submission, in acknowledgement. You were right. In the amphitheater. At the council. About everything. I built an empire on fear and called it strength, and it nearly destroyed me." His voice dropped. "I'm sorry. For the rejection. For the assassins. For every moment I treated you as worthless when you were stronger than I ever had the courage to be. I can't undo any of it, but I want you to know I understand what I destroyed." The apology was genuine, raw. Exactly what she'd needed to hear months ago, standing broken in the rain. Now it felt almost irrelevant, because she'd become someone who didn't need his validation to know her worth. "I accept your apology," Seraphine said quietly, "not because it fixes anything, but because holding on to anger would make me the same kind of wolf who started this coup. Rigid, afraid of change, unable to see past what was broken to what might be possible." She offered him her hand. "The Empire needs you, Varric. Needs someone who understands the old system well enough to help dismantle it. Someone who can show wolves that admitting mistakes doesn't make you weak. That transformation is possible even for rulers who thought they were beyond change." Varric took her hand, let her pull him to his feet. The gesture was symbolic, powerful, exactly the kind of image that would spread through the Empire and either inspire hope or further division. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we go back to Crystalline Hall and show the Transitional Council that the coup failed. That reform survived its first real test." Seraphine looked at the assembled soldiers. "And we give every wolf here a choice. Support the transitional government and help build something better, or walk away to territories that want traditional hierarchy. Some will choose to leave, I know. But the ones who stay will be there because they believe in transformation, not because they're terrified of punishment. That's how you build something lasting." The soldiers who'd supported the coup were given the choice she'd promised. Half left for Eastern territories, still loyal to old power structures. The rest, seeing their general defeated and their king supporting reform, swore new oaths to the Transitional Council. By dawn, Thornfell was secure and Seraphine was riding back to Crystalline Hall with Varric beside her and a contingent of loyal forces who'd proven that change could survive opposition. Kael'thorn met them at the gates, his expression cycling between relief and fury. "You're alive." "Barely." Seraphine dismounted, every muscle screaming protest. "But the coup failed. Varric's back. And we have proof that the Transitional Council can survive wolves trying to destroy it. You also nearly got yourself killed." "That was always a possibility." She moved past him toward the command center. "Come on, we have work to do." The next 3 months were controlled chaos. The Transitional Council worked 20-hour days implementing reforms, establishing oversight committees, and navigating political crises that emerged almost daily. Seraphine learned imperial governance through trial by fire, making mistakes and correcting them and slowly building the kind of institutional knowledge that couldn't be taught in any classroom. Varric served as an advisor, using his decades of experience to help identify corruption and dismantle power structures that enabled it. His presence was controversial, But his expertise was undeniable. Wolves who'd hated him learned to work alongside him. Not forgiveness, just pragmatic acceptance that transformation required everyone, even former tyrants trying to change. Calethorn coordinated military restructuring, breaking up concentrations of power that allowed commanders to launch coups and building in safeguards against future rebellions. His methods were ruthlessly efficient, which created friction with council members who wanted gentler approaches. But gentle didn't survive in an empire still testing whether reform could work. Seraphine mediated between them, using the strange authority she'd earned by surviving to bridge gaps that threatened to tear the council apart. She learned that leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It was about admitting uncertainty while still making decisions, about balancing idealism with pragmatism, about accepting that progress was messy and imperfect and absolutely necessary. 3 months after the coup, the Transitional Council presented their proposal for permanent governance to the Imperial Assembly, a hybrid system combining elected regional councils with a central oversight body designed to prevent any single ruler from consolidating absolute power. Term limits, financial transparency, independent judiciary. All the structural changes that made traditional rulers nervous. The vote was close, 62% approval, just enough to move forward. The empire fractured anyway. 3 eastern territories seceded rather than accept shared governance, forming their own alliance under traditional hierarchy. The western kingdoms debated joining them, but ultimately decided reform was worth attempting. What remained was smaller, more fragile, but also more committed to transformation than dominance. Seraphine stood on the balcony of her quarters in Crystalline Hall 6 months after the summit, watching construction crews rebuild sections damaged during the coup. The empire had survived its first real test of whether change was possible. Barely. With heavy casualties and permanent fractures. But it survived. Calethorn found her there as evening fell, carrying 2 glasses of whiskey that had become their ritual after long days of governance. The Eastern Territories are forming a military alliance, he said without preamble. Marcus thinks they'll try to retake the Imperial core within a year. Marcus worries professionally. Seraphine accepted the whiskey. What do you think? I think they'll try and fail. The territories that stayed with reform have stronger economies and more motivated populations. Wolves fight harder for something they believe in than something they're forced to accept. He leaned against the balcony railing beside her. You did this. Built something that survived when everyone said it would collapse. We did this. And it's not built yet. Just started. Fair enough? Calethorn took a drink. Question. Always dangerous when you lead with that. What happens when the crisis is over? When the empire stabilizes and we're not fighting for survival every day? What do you want then? The question echoed the one he'd asked months ago before the summit. Back then, she hadn't known the answer. Now, standing in the wreckage and renewal of an empire she'd helped transform, Seraphine found the words came easier. I want to keep building. Keep proving that wolves like me and Alara can change systems designed to crush us. Keep showing that strength can mean creation instead of domination. She looked at him directly. And I want to do it with people who understand that leadership is temporary, that power is responsibility, not possession. That includes you, if you're interested. The offer was genuine, complicated, exactly the kind of partnership she'd learned to value over simple romance or political alliance. Calethorn's smile was soft. I'm interested. Been interested since you stood between 2 alpha kings and forced us to see ourselves clearly. Just wasn't sure you'd want a wolf who spent 6 years planning revenge instead of building alternatives. People change. You taught me that. By changing yourself. They stood in comfortable silence as night fell over Crystalline Hall. 2 wolves who'd been shaped by violence and loss and the desperate need for transformation. Months later, Varric appeared at Seraphine's office, carrying documents and wearing an expression of grim determination. I'm stepping down from the advisory council, he said without preamble. Seraphine looked up from the trade agreement she'd been reviewing. Why? Because I've spent 40 years as Alpha King and 6 months trying to undo the damage that authority caused. It's time someone else guided Thornfell's integration into the new governance structure. Someone without my history. Who? You. If you'll accept. Varric set the documents on her desk. Thornfell needs a leader who understands both the old system and the new one. who survived the worst the Empire could inflict and chose transformation over revenge. That's you. The offer was staggering, unprecedented, exactly the kind of symbolic gesture that would either heal wounds or reopen them. I can't, Seraphine said quietly. Thornfell is where I was rejected, where I almost died. Asking me to lead the territory that tried to destroy me is exactly why it matters. Varric's voice was steady. Every wolf who was crushed by the old hierarchy needs to see that survival can become leadership, that the Empire's worst moments can transform into its greatest strengths. He moved toward the door, paused at the threshold. I destroyed our bond because I was terrified of vulnerability. Spent decades believing strength required eliminating anything that made me feel weak. You proved that was a lie. The least I can do is give you the territory I used to symbolize that old thinking and let you transform it into something better. He left before she could respond, leaving the documents and the impossible choice. Seraphine sat alone in her office for a long time, turning over what accepting would mean. Returning to the place where she'd been most broken, leading wolves who'd watched her humiliation, transforming the territory that represented everything she'd fought against. It was possibly the hardest thing anyone had asked her to do, which was exactly why it mattered. 3 days later, Seraphine Vale accepted leadership of Thornfell territory with the mandate to integrate it fully into the reformed imperial structure. The ceremony was held in the same courtyard where Varric had rejected her, now rebuilt into a public forum designed for transparent governance. Wolves who'd laughed at her humiliation now knelt in respect, not because she demanded it, because she'd earned it through survival and transformation and the willingness to return to the place that tried to destroy her. Varric attended the ceremony, standing in the crowd rather than on the platform. When their eyes met, he nodded once. Acknowledgement, respect, the closest thing to closure either of them would get. Seraphine's first act as Thornfell's leader was to establish the House of Moonvale within the renovated palace grounds, a sanctuary for rejected wolves, discarded mates, and survivors of the hierarchy's cruelty. A place where broken didn't mean worthless, and survival could become the foundation for something stronger. The second act was opening Thornfell's financial records to full public audit, exposing every instance of corruption Varric had hidden and using the recovered funds to rebuild communities his empire had destroyed. The territory transformed slowly, painfully, with resistance from wolves who wanted the old order back and friction from those who thought reform wasn't happening fast enough. But it transformed. 2 years after the summit, Seraphine stood in the House of Moonvale's central hall, watching new arrivals settle into sanctuary. Wolves who'd been rejected, abandoned, declared worthless by the hierarchy, all of them learning that survival was just the beginning. Calethorn found her there, his presence familiar and grounding in ways she'd stopped questioning months ago. The Eastern Alliance collapsed, he said. Internal fighting over resources. Turns out traditional hierarchy works great when everyone agrees who's strongest, but falls apart when multiple alphas want the same power. So they'll probably try to rejoin the reformed territories. Within 6 months, Lady Ashira is already drafting integration proposals. His smile was sharp. Apparently your experiment in shared governance is more stable than absolute rule. Who knew? Anyone who was paying attention. Seraphine turned to face him. Question. Always dangerous when you lead with that. What do you want? Not from the Empire. Not from governance. From your life now that revenge is over and Alara's memory is honored, and you're not consumed by the need to destroy Varric. Calethorn was quiet for a moment, his storm-gray eyes showing the kind of vulnerability that had once terrified him. I want what Alara wanted. An empire where strength means building instead of destroying, where wolves like her don't get burned alive for challenging power. He moved closer. And I want to build it with someone who reminds me every day why transformation matters. Someone who survived everything the hierarchy could inflict and chose to create instead of becoming what tried to destroy her. His hand found hers. That's you, if you're interested. The offer wasn't political, wasn't strategic, just genuine connection between two wolves who'd been shaped by loss and found purpose in transformation. I'm interested, Seraphine said quietly. Been interested since you stopped seeing me as a weapon and started seeing me as a person. Just wasn't sure you'd want a wolf who's still figuring out how to lead without breaking, We're all still figuring that out. Calethorn's smile was soft. That's the point. We build it together instead of pretending we have all the answers. Months later, beneath falling snow on the fortress balcony, where their alliance had first deepened into something more, Calethorn offered Seraphine the moonstone ring that had belonged to his sister. Not a claim of possession, not a political alliance, just two wolves choosing partnership over isolation. Seraphine accepted. Not because fate demanded it, not because the Empire needed symbolic unity, but because somewhere between rejection and transformation, she'd learned that strength wasn't about standing alone. It was about building something strong enough that standing together amplified rather than diminished. The Empire continued evolving, messily, imperfectly, with setbacks and resistance and wolves who'd never accept that hierarchy could be dismantled. But it evolved. And Seraphine Vale, once rejected as worthless, became the symbol of what transformation could accomplish when survival evolved into purpose. She stood on Ravarin Keep's highest tower 3 years after the summit, watching the sun rise over an empire that looked nothing like the one that had tried to destroy her. Territories governed by councils instead of tyrants, financial transparency instead of corruption, wolves building futures instead of just surviving presents. It wasn't perfect, would never be perfect, but it was better. And better was enough. Calethorn joined her as dawn broke fully, his arms wrapping around her in the kind of casual intimacy that had replaced formal alliances. Regrets? He asked quietly. About surviving? Never. About everything it took to get here? Sometimes. She leaned into his warmth. But mostly, I'm just grateful I lived long enough to see this, to help build it. Alara would have loved you. I know. That's why I keep trying. Because wolves like her deserve to see their ideals become reality instead of dying for believing transformation was possible. They stood together as the Empire woke, two wolves who'd been forged by violence and loss and the desperate need for something better than what destroyed them. The House of Moonvale filled with survivors who learned that broken could become powerful. Thornfell transformed from a symbol of imperial cruelty into proof that territories could evolve. The reformed governance structure survived challenges from traditionalists who wanted absolute hierarchy restored. And Seraphine Vale, the wolf who'd stood in rain-soaked courtyards waiting to die, became the living reminder that survival without purpose was just slow death. But survival with purpose could transform empires. Years later, when young wolves asked how the empire changed, the answer was always the same. A rejected mate refused to die quietly. Two kings learned that revenge and power were hollow without transformation. And together they proved that strength wasn't about crushing opposition. It was about building something strong enough that it didn't need to crush anyone to survive. The empire never returned to what it was. The fractures remained. The eastern territories stayed separate, clinging to hierarchy. The western kingdoms experimented with governance models that terrified traditionalists. But the core territories that committed to reform thrived. Economically, socially, in ways that proved shared governance could work when wolves chose it instead of having it forced on them. Seraphine and Calethorn ruled the Night Dominion together, not as alpha and mate, but as partners who'd learned that leadership was temporary and power was responsibility. Varric spent his remaining years teaching governance at the Imperial Academy, using his failures as lessons for young wolves who'd inherited an empire their predecessors had nearly destroyed. He never fully escaped his history, never found redemption in the clean narrative sense, but he found purpose in preventing others from repeating his mistakes. And Seraphine, the wolf everyone said should have died in that courtyard, lived long enough to watch the empire transform into something that valued survival and creation over domination and destruction. She never forgot what rejection felt like, never lost the phantom pain of the shattered bond, never stopped understanding that she'd survived through luck and fury and the willingness of one king to see potential where another saw worthlessness. But she learned that survival was just the foundation. What you built on it determined whether the pain had meaning. And standing on Ravarin Keep, watching the empire she'd helped transform, Seraphine Vale knew with absolute certainty that every moment of agony had been worth it, because she'd taken the worst the hierarchy could inflict and used it to prove that wolves could be better than what the empire made them. That strength could mean building instead of destroying. That power could serve instead of dominate. That even broken bonds could lead to transformations that saved empires. and that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could be was a wolf with nothing left to lose and everything to prove.